Legal firm interviews. First firm, and we'll just go ahead and do the same process as last time. Everybody okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. Hayes, Phillips, Hoffman, and Carberry. Hello.
Hi. Good evening.
So what we're going to do is we'll get started with, got 8 questions. We have an hour to go through this, and so we have 8 questions that I'll read and have you answer. And then if we make it through those 8 and still have time, then council will have, we may have additional questions for you. Okay. To start out, do you want to introduce yourselves for us?
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Corey Hoffman. I'm a partner with the law firm of Hayes, Phillips, Hoffman, and Carberry. The firm was formed in 1985. I joined the firm in 1995, became a partner in the year 2000, and have been a partner ever since. Our firm practices local government law, municipal law. That's what we do. We are certainly honored to have the opportunity to interview tonight. We are certainly familiar with 2 of the 3 firms, and from our perspective, you can't go wrong. You have a lot of good opportunities to choose from.
And my name is Kendra Carberry. I have been with the firm since 1996. I became a partner in 2001, so Corey and I have worked together most of our careers. I worked at Jefferson County Attorney's Office for a bit before I came to the firm, but basically this has been my sole legal job. And as Corey mentioned, all we do is municipal law. That's our passion. That's what we love to do. We do represent 2 counties as well, so I should say local government law more accurately, but particularly local government law is our specialty, and that's what we like to do. So that's why we're here.
Thank you. First question is, what do you know about the city of Littleton, and how would you propose to meet the city's legal needs?
Well, I think in a lot of ways that's a trick question, because I can certainly learn from reading your website, for example, the history of Littleton. I certainly have a lot of good meals here. I would be doing my family a disservice if we weren't coming to the Melting Pot at least a couple times a year. But really, that's one of those questions. I drive through it. I'm certainly familiar with it. I live in Douglas County, so I live about 25 miles away. But it's really, from my perspective, what you all ultimately would want me to know about Littleton in terms of being able to be your legal advisor and giving you the legal advice to implement the policy of the Littleton you want. So I know it as someone passing through, but I'm not sure how important that is, truthfully. And then in terms of how we would meet your legal needs, I think we were fairly direct in our response to the request for proposals that if what you're looking for is effectively an in-house attorney that is out-house, we're not a good choice for you. That's just not the way we have found it effective to practice law. Representing our clients as out-house, so to speak, counsel. That's not to say that we are not going to be here when you need us, but to be here 3 to 4 days a week when, from our perspective, historically, that really hasn't been necessary. It hasn't been economical for the client. What we think we bring to the table is top quality municipal representation at a good price. We provide it economically. I mean, we can give many examples of how we do that. I think both the blessing and the curse of how we practice municipal law today is that we're always there. All of my clients have my cell phone number, whether I like it or not. I am always on email. And so we respond immediately. And so the fact that we don't have to walk down the hall to come talk to us, from my perspective, isn't important. That's not to say it might not be important to you. If it is, again, I would suggest that we're probably not the right fit. But if you're looking for someone that can react quickly, give prompt legal advice that's correct, do risk assessment, do all the things that certainly we believe municipal lawyers do to make themselves invaluable and indispensable to their clients, and having an office 3 to 4 days a week here isn't part of it, then we think you should look carefully at what we have to offer.
Who from your firm would be designated to the city as the city attorney, and why? And would you provide regular on-site office hours to meet the city's needs?
That would be me. And the why is a couple of reasons. Certainly, one of the primary things we look at first and foremost when we are looking at whether or not to look at an opportunity is our schedule. And Tuesday night is a very popular night for cities and towns to meet, and my schedule allows the Tuesday night meetings. So that's the first part of it. But ultimately, also, I live fairly close. I mean, I work downtown and live just south of Parker in Douglas County. This is, in my world, close because, truthfully, I put 35,000 miles a year on my car. So this is a quick jaunt. And in terms of office hours, I mean, on the day of council, absolutely, and as needed. But again, going back to the 3 to 4 days a week, that's not our model. I do provide office hours for a couple of my municipal clients on city council days. I spend every Wednesday up in the city of Blackhawk. I spend every other Thursday afternoon in North Glen. And North Glen, for a long time, thought they wanted more regular office hours, and I think found ultimately over time that it wasn't necessary. And so I'm there at the afternoon of council meetings. I arrive there usually about 3 o'clock. Their council meetings are at 7. But again, if on Tuesdays, whether it's every Tuesday or every other Tuesday, you wanted me here, I'm here.
Outline for us your municipal experience, particularly in the areas, and there's 7 areas. I'll read those, and then you can respond to each of them individually. Elections, land use, muni court, employment, IGAs, home rule charter interpretation, and ordinance drafting.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm going to start by deferring to Kendra, since I happen to think I'm sitting next to the preeminent expert in Colorado on election law, so I'm going to get out of the way.
Thank you. Election law is a huge part of my practice. I help all 18 of our municipal clients and both of our county clients with elections. I am on the interjurisdictional election committee, which involves the Secretary of State, representatives from county clerks, municipal clerks, as well as special districts. And so we regularly meet to go over impending election legislation. So I am in constant contact with our client clerks about elections. I'm quite familiar with election IGAs. I've dealt with all types of elections, Tabor elections, recall elections, initiative and referendum elections. I did notice also in your charter that you all redistrict every 4 years, which is quite interesting. I have dealt with redistricting for a number of my clients and written several articles on redistricting, particularly related to municipalities. So I did find it interesting in your charter that it's a 4-year process. In most communities, it's just based on the census. So that's one thing I did find interesting and probably a reasonable amount of work for you all. So that, like I said, I enjoy election law. I may be crazy. Jeff Wilson from CML and I share that bond because he enjoys election law as well. So most of the election questions come to me, and most of the clerks, feel free to call me directly with election questions. And the next was land use. Would you like to take that?
Well, and representing municipalities' land use is a fundamental part of the practice. We represent municipalities that run the gamut from small towns in the middle of whether it be Weld County or Elbert County to big cities that are infill cities that are having development, to mountain communities. And they all provide different land use challenges, whether it is annexation, and I've certainly done a fair amount of annexation litigation. You'd like to be able to get along with your neighbors, but often land use ends up being the area in which you do not. And so both in terms of cooperative relationships as it relates to land use and when things aren't as cooperative, that's a part of certainly my experience. In addition, whether it be in the zoning context, the land development context, as you look at whether you think it is good policy or not, as you see the development of large casinos in the city of Blackhawk, I got to tell you, my fingerprints are on that. In terms of making sure that the city is protected in these large-scale developments, and making sure that whether it's the infrastructure, in whatever other unique issues, to the small town of Kiowa out in Elbert County, and the land use challenges that they have in trying to aggressively promote development, yet at the same time knowing that they are just far enough that they have to provide a lot of, that they want to make themselves as user-friendly as possible, and trying to help on the land use side with that, to sign codes, which in most circumstances are in land use codes, not always. And over the last couple of years, I have been spending a lot of time trying to practice what I preach in terms of talking about what need to be content-neutral sign codes. And that sounds really simple when you say it, and then when you try to put it into play, not so much. And again, I think that is fundamentally a part of land use, and really a part that the citizenry appreciates more than anything in terms of both your business community and your residential community, especially come election season, when they may want to put a certain number of signs in their yards, certain numbers of signs on businesses, or just having your liquor store that wants to put up a whole bunch of signs about the deal of the week, and trying to talk about the fact that you can't look at the words and you're looking at the size, the materials. So I would suggest that that's part of land use as well.
And another more recent example is the marijuana issue, Amendment 64, medical. I understand you all have a licensing program right now for medical marijuana. We are on top of the whole recreational, or now they're not calling it recreational anymore, so we can't use that word anymore. We're now calling it adult use marijuana. So don't you call it recreational anymore. So anyway, we are on top of that. We are dealing with that for all of our clients, both municipal and county. And I will tell you, they're all over the book. Some counties, some clients have said, hey, you know what? Our voters voted for this in an overwhelming percentage, so therefore we're going to have to figure out how to make this happen. Others said, no, we didn't want medical, so we don't want recreational. And so there's a lot of intricacies there. There's also some open questions about what constitutes public use of marijuana. So we deal with a lot of those issues. And the benefit of our firm dealing with so many municipalities is that we are able to address some of those issues on a wider scale. So we're not researching this issue just for Littleton. Perhaps it's an issue for Littleton as well as the town of Superior, or Littleton as well as the city of Northglenn, and therefore we do provide an economy of scale in that way, particularly with issues like Amendment 64 that were just thrown on all of us and are about to be thrown on us even more. So.
And I got to tell you, if you would have told me when I started practicing law that I was going to be writing a zoning ordinance defining a marijuana social club, I would have told you were crazy.
That's true.
As it relates to municipal court, we certainly provide municipal court services for many of our clients, and for many of our clients we don't. I was the prosecutor, and in name still am, since 1996 in the town of Parker, although now our associates do the work. We've prosecuted for many of our clients, and I'm also, for what it's worth, the team court judge in the town of Parker that I think I got through my work in the municipal court. But we also, on occasion, subcontract the municipal court. We use municipal court as a proving ground, if you will, for our associates. The same rules of evidence apply. It is a great opportunity. But at the same time, it's one of many functions that we have our associates do. So when we have the opportunity, or the client has an opportunity to have a prosecutor that they are happy with, it is not, from our perspective, an essential function that we provide. And so it's our understanding, certainly, that you have a prosecutor in place. To the extent that the council is happy with that prosecutor, we're thrilled. If it's a service you want us to provide, we can provide that as well. But the prosecution, the firm you have in place to do your prosecution, is a firm that, truthfully, we subcontract with for some of our clients. And so we are certainly comfortable with them and think they do an excellent job of municipal prosecution. Employment. Again, I would suggest that that is one of the guts of our practice. In representing municipalities of different sizes, you have different issues. Oftentimes when you have a staff of, let's say 5 people, you have one set of issues. And when you have cities of 100, 200 employees, you have a whole different set of issues. We regularly draft employee handbooks. I'm currently engaged in the process for one of my clients of converting their handbook from a for-cause employment to at-will, and going through that process and trying to disseminate the information, assist in disseminating the information to department heads and employees as to what that means over time, because it's a significant change in their employment status. We advise the city council on employment of their very few employees, and then more predominantly department heads and the city manager in terms of supervision, having policies in place, guidelines to assist them, and when things go sideways, being able to advise them on how best to protect the city in making employment decisions that are often difficult decisions. In my experience, it is the part of the job that the department heads and the city manager like the least, and I can appreciate that. It's not pleasant, but it's a necessary part of the advice we give. We certainly included within that is applicable federal law, whether it be the ADA, Age Discrimination in Employment Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act. Those are all parts of the world we live in terms of advising our clients on employment law.
The next one's IGAs. I'll take that. I probably have done too many IGAs to count, but the general areas in which we specialize, obviously election IGAs. Every time we have a coordinated election with the county, we'll have an IGA to govern that election. CDOT, we do a lot of IGAs with CDOT. I represent the town of Superior. We have 36 going through there. We have some big projects occurring on 36 right as we speak. We also, using Superior as an example, have a lot of IGAs with the county. Growth IGAs, open space IGAs, particularly in Boulder County. There's a lot of open space. We do combined management through IGAs. So we have, like I said, just a ton of experience negotiating, drafting IGAs. I'll tell you, with CDOT, there's not as much drafting or negotiating because they pretty much throw you the take it or leave it IGA, but we do our best with CDOT. But most of the other IGAs, we're able to successfully negotiate a compromise among the two municipalities, or the county and the municipality.
And I would suggest the other type of IGA that's becoming more predominant, at least in my practice, especially representing urban renewal authorities, is IGAs on whether or not to look at sharing any of the increment with other taxing entities. And that is an area that is I'm spending a lot more time in my practice in, wondering about how one might prove impacts on a taxing entity that are being lost or somehow adversely impacted as part of urban renewal. And so that has certainly become a much larger, over the last probably 3 to 5 years, part of my practice, as I think urban renewal has become a more predominant issue in Colorado. Home rule, and I think you said home rule charter interpretation. And I would hope that we never have to interpret home rule charter provisions that we wrote, because they'll be crystal clear. But I don't think that's the case. We spend a lot of time with home rule charters. We represent several home rule municipalities. We've drafted home rule charters. I drafted most recently, or assisted in drafting the charter for the town of Kiowa when it converted from statutory town to a home rule municipality.
And we've done both where I think the council takes that on, or the board of trustees. I've also represented a charter commission, the Edgewater Charter Commission, City of Edgewater, when they were converting to home rule. And that was a citizen group, which was often interesting because it was a very large citizen group. But it was sometimes difficult to keep everyone on the same page. But we've done both of those types of charter. And some are amendments. With the case of the Charter Commission, it was a full, we're getting a whole new charter. We've also done a number of charter amendments for our various home rule clients. And I think that, going back to the interpretation, that helps. I mean, when you're sitting down trying to draft a new charter provision, it really makes you think about how someone is going to interpret that later, and trying to keep that language as plain and understandable and unambiguous as possible.
And more recently, I think the City of North Glen, for example, created a charter commission simply to go through the charter section by section and see if it still was current, and then came back with a series of amendments for the City Council. I guess one way I would tie together the discussion about municipal court and your home rule charter is one of the exercises that we went through within the past, 2 weeks probably, as we start going through the legislative session and advise our clients on legislative changes, is that there's a recent legislative change that authorizes municipal courts to have a higher fine amount. Well, the discussion from our perspective doesn't just end with, here's the new law. We had to look at all of our home rule charter, our home rule municipalities' charter, to see if a charter amendment is necessary to implement the change at the statewide level. So that's an example of looking at the charter. And within the past probably 10 years, when you've had discussions, for example, about executive sessions, many charters have very specific provisions about executive sessions. And so part of the discussion in interpreting home rule charters as it relates to open meetings, I will tell you as a local government lawyer, I think the decisions on how to conduct your meetings are local in nature. I feel passionately that local government gets to decide things that are local in nature, and meetings are one of those items. And so then you pick up the home rule charter and you say, okay, is it just this piece, or is it the entirety of the meeting analysis that, for example, is a matter of local concern? Are executive sessions covered by your charter, or are they covered by the new state law? And my hunch is that the folks at the statewide level will often disagree with my interpretation. But I think that goes back to the passion. I really believe, and it's one of the reasons I love what I do, that you folks make the decisions that matter to your constituents. And that's why it's an honor to be the one to represent local governments, because you get to be involved in decisions that matter to the people in your community. And it starts with your local constitution, which is your home rule charter.
Last one's ordinance drafting. And again, I think we do this on a regular basis, do ordinance drafting, sometimes more in a comprehensive way, where we'll draft an entire new land use code, which I recently did for the town of Superior. For the city of Greenwood Village, when I was there, we did a street cut permit ordinance, which was very comprehensive in nature. So it comes down to something as broad as that versus the ordinances we're drafting to increase the municipal fine from $1,000 to $2,650 for some of our clients. So some of them are rather mundane, some of them are much more complicated. In the case of the street cut permit ordinance that I drafted, we involved at the time, 22 telecom companies in that process. So it was a bit cumbersome, but the city was trying to get the input from everyone who would be affected by that ordinance. So again, we can do the mundane, which is we draft an ordinance increasing your jurisdiction, your fine amount of your municipal court, and that is quick and an easy process, and we do that. We send it to you, put it on an agenda, you all get to consider it, down to, that street cut ordinance took us a year by the time we got all the input. So we've done all types of ordinance drafting.
And I guess it raises a good point. I think ultimately, in many ways, you as the council dictate that process depending on the issue. Many communities, for example, I'll go back to the sign code because I've got a lot of recent scars because I had a discussion on a sign code last night in the city of North Glen, so it's at the forefront. But in terms of getting the community input, the town of Parker had a community group that got together that I participated in for several months in terms of what they wanted in the sign code, talking about a content-neutral sign code, and trying to make those visions meet. And that was the direction of council. And I think at the end of the day, it's been tweaked a couple times, but I think the council was happy with the product they got. That was a long-term process that had a lot of stakeholders in it. More recently, when, and going back to the medical marijuana issue, there were a lot of folks concerned about having mini grow houses in residential homes, and one of many communities that we represented started looking at limitations on the number of plants based on building codes. So we were working with building officials, trying to figure out how to apply the terminology in building codes, make it enforceable, make sure that it didn't violate the Colorado Constitution, and drew that balance. And there are a lot of what I'll call value judgments that come from the council in terms of what do you want at the end of the day. And our job is, in drafting the ordinance, to make sure we're implementing your vision, but at the same time, you've got constitutional provisions, later statutory provisions, and making sure that it's consistent. All of that is part of ordinance drafting. And I guess finally, I'll tell you another scar, because I think you learn the most from the battles you lose. There is a Colorado Supreme Court case, City of North Glen versus Ibarra. The City of North Glen decided to regulate the number of juvenile sex offenders that could live together. It was done as part of their zoning ordinance. I would tell you that zoning is part and parcel a matter of local concern. I will, you know what the Supreme Court did? They said, it's not a zoning ordinance. What you're doing is you're addressing a matter of statewide concern, which is where we place our juvenile offenders. I got to tell you that when we were looking at that ordinance, we thought of a lot of things. We thought about the Federal Fair Housing Act, whether we were violating that. We did a whole host of analysis. We never thought that it was somehow an issue of social services and where juvenile offenders were placed. So lesson learned, because when we're looking at ordinances, we're trying to figure out every possible manner in which it could be challenged. That's part of what we do. Would have never conceived of that one. But the Supreme Court came up with it, and we had to live by it.
Okay. Describe what you believe the city attorney's role should be with the following parties: the city council, the citizens, management, and employees.
Want to start?
Sure. Well, let me start with council, because ultimately our job as city attorney is to represent the city of Littleton by and through its city council, by and through you. You are our client, the seven of you. As part of our job advising you as the city council, we advise the entity. But ultimately, our loyalty is to the city by and through its council. So we report to the seven of you. And so that is lesson number one. You are the client. And we have that discussion oftentimes with city managers, with department heads, certainly with employees, and occasionally with citizens. Because it's important that not only we know, but that everyone knows who our client is. Because quite frankly, we don't want to be fielding calls from citizens who think we're their attorney. Although I got to tell you that there are some clients that will oftentimes say, we have a citizen's call we want you to take. And we will take that call if that is the client's wish and make sure they understand who the client is, but nonetheless take the call. But starting with the idea that ultimately you are the client, that also dictates a lot of aspects of the relationship, because different communities want our role to be different. But in a very general sense, once we understand that we are the legal advisor that helps the administrators implement your policies, as part of that, it then comes down to the city manager and advising the city manager and advising the boards and commissions of the city, advising the department heads, and oftentimes mid-level managers as well that may have issues. Much of that advice and how it's given as it relates to the city manager, the department heads, mid-level management is dictated by your policies and by the city manager's policies in terms of how you want that interaction to be. We are as accessible to city employees and city management as you want us to be.
And we do have different clients that handle it differently. I mean, I have some clients that I am accessible to every single employee down to the receptionist at the front desk, and I have other clients who I only take direction from the town or city manager. And we're able to work under both situations, and it works fine. We just need some direction to let us know which is where you all want to be. And sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. You know, sometimes it's, hey, I've spoken to the city manager. He's authorized me to chat with you about this issue. So it really, you all dictate that policy, and we're happy to work in whatever framework works well for you.
And one of the policies, sort of the unwritten policies, if you will, that I've developed over the years, because I never want a client to hesitate to call because they think if they have a quick question, it's going to cost a lot of money. You know what, if it is, and this is an arbitrary number in a sense, but we bill in tenths. And so if a call is less than 12 minutes, I don't bill it, if that's the only call of the day from the city of Littleton. So what that allows is for someone to call, say, hey, could you just take a quick look at this, and I can pull up the code and look at it and call and give an immediate response? You're not going to see that on the bill. Now, if there's 20 calls like that, you will, because they'll add up. But it also allows the quick telephone calls from staff without the idea that I'm not sure I'm authorized to do this. Certainly, again, that's an issue of management and making sure that those calls can be made, but it's a tool. And with email, communications become that much quicker, that much easier. And so part of that municipal representation, I think, is understanding that there shouldn't be a hesitation to call for those quick questions as well.
Great.
Okay. Describe a situation when you were involved with something that went wrong with a city client, and what would you do differently?
I'll use an example that's reasonably close. City of Greenville Village has a development that you all may be familiar with called the Landmark. And it's actually a rather successful development at this point. I will tell you that it was very difficult to get where it is now. I think the difficulty was the developer came in promising a lot. And unfortunately, and he's now deceased, so I will keep that in mind, but he was indicted for embezzlement and formed Metro, at least several Metro districts to finance the development. And at the time, I think my client was so excited to have the development, understandably, that there was not a lot of questioning. And what I've used that as an example with some other clients, saying, hey, hold on. This sounds like this developer is bringing you the world and it's not going to cost you a dime. But, you know, in the case of Landmark, developer ended up declaring bankruptcy, embezzling funds. Luckily, I advised the city to pull a letter of credit for $650,000 the day before he filed bankruptcy. So we were at least able to use that letter of credit. But what had happened was a lot of the public improvements were very, very shoddily done and needed a lot of help. So luckily we had some money to do that. Looking back, I would advise my client to be far more, I don't want to say hesitant because development is important, but to inquire more, to get more background, to get more details on the developer, to inquire more about the metropolitan district, to have a little bit more control over the district. These developer districts, for a while, they would just come in and developer districts would be formed. And next thing you know, these properties have 75 mils of taxes on them and they can't sell them, shockingly. No one's going to buy a condo with the kind of tax liability. So in the end, Greenville Village worked it out in the Landmark and it is a successful development, but that has taught me to be far more, I don't want to say distrusting, but just to ask a lot of questions, particularly about developers and developer metro districts. It's just one example. Another.
Similar, probably in many respects. This involves urban renewal and eminent domain, which I would appreciate is a tricky issue. But I represent a client that when I began representing them several years ago, they had a pending eminent domain action to basically tear down an auto repair shop that had been in the community for many, many years to put a Walgreens in place. And as I was advising the client, it became clear to me that the client wasn't really behind this anymore. And ultimately, the client determined that they'd made a mistake and determined to get out of the deal. And that case actually went up to the Colorado Supreme Court as well. Out of that came the law that a municipal government cannot contract away the authority to condemn. The Urban Renewal Authority in that case was able to essentially get out of the deal because the contract that it had signed said they guaranteed they would condemn property on a developer's behalf. I'm happy to say I inherited that contract, but nonetheless, when I came aboard, the project was going forward. Fundamentally, throwing aside all of the issues, whether it be related to urban renewal or eminent domain, what I learned is that at least to ask my municipal clients to look at the deal. It's not my role as legal advisor to look at the deal. Our job is to give legal advice. Our job is certainly to do risk assessment. But ultimately, the council or the governing body, it's their job to decide if this is a good idea. I guess my suggestion would be I always ask the question, make sure it's a good idea, because not every deal is necessarily a good one. And I think that's an easier conversation to have today than it might have been 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, but it's nonetheless an important one.
In the event you were selected to provide legal services to the city, do you or your firm have any existing relationships with Inglewood, Centennial, Highlands Ranch, South Metro Fire Rescue, or any relationship or cases that would create a potential conflict of interest?
We do not have any existing relationships with any of those entities. I did some work several years ago for the city of Inglewood, but it's been probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and so no current relationship, and other than an adversarial one with South Metro Fire and Rescue, and that arises out of my representation of the Parker Authority for Reinvestment. And as I was just discussing urban renewal, that's we are in discussions with the South Metro about issues related to urban renewal and their property tax in the Parker Authority for Reinvestment boundary areas.
Why do you believe that you have the adequate capacity, meaning time and staff, to provide legal services to the city of Littleton?
I'll jump in here. I think, we have 3 partners that work in our office full-time. We have 2 of councils, Lee Phillips, it works up in Fairplay, and Matt Muir works in Vale. We also have 4 associates, so we do have the capacity. We are actually considering hiring another associate as well. We have the capacity, and we have terrific associates who help us out with a lot of things. The other thing, as I think I mentioned before, is we do have some economies of scale which help us to provide the legal services at a more reasonable cost for each of our clients, because we're able to do certain things like go back to the municipal jurisdiction memo. One associate drafted a memo, and then we sent that out to all of our clients. Now, we went back and made that memo, made sure it made sense for each of our clients, and reviewed each charter. But the body of the memo is the same. The legislation is the same, has the same effect on all Colorado municipalities. So that kind of thing, I think, enables us to be economical as well. And we do have a full staff. We also have 2 legal assistants and 1 office manager who also provides legal assistant services. So we are fully staffed, and we don't think there would be any problem at all.
And again, this goes back to really what we do. I think when you hire us, you hire a firm that, while I would be the city attorney, I have 7 people, 8 people working with me that can assist on any given project. And I got to tell you, when we told Lee Phillips, who is now in Fairplay, he has his office up on our west wing, up on Highway 9 in Fairplay. He lived most of his adult life on Prescott Street in Littleton. He still, that house is still in his family because he couldn't bear to part with it. So he was absolutely thrilled that we were here tonight. But in any event, I don't think any of our clients have ever thought that they were not being serviced in an adequate way. We have never had an issue with capacity. I think that's because of how we do our work. Again, it may, my now 17-year-old child's first sentence was IREA is bad. The reason for that was I was in litigation with IREA as he was learning to talk. So I would be lying to you if I said I didn't bring my work home with me. It means that I have my cell phone. It means I have my laptop. It means that we're accessible. And while it wouldn't do it unless we loved it. And so do we have the capacity? Absolutely, we do.
Great. Those are the 8 questions. We have about 15 minutes. Council, any questions? Anyone else have any questions? Bill.
Corey and Kendra,
Standing joke.
first off, thank you. I'll start with the softball a little bit here. Is how has municipal representation changed? You had a career in it, and you have at least some perspective on history. So, how's it changed?
Technology, for one. It's far easier. Communication, in some ways, far easier. It's quicker. In some ways, that puts a lot of pressure on us because we're expected to respond very quickly, which we do. We have a policy of responding to all email and telephone calls at a minimum of 24 hours. That's at a maximum, I should say, 24 hours. So if we don't respond within 24 hours, we're not meeting our own internal policy. And that becomes more difficult with email, but because you can get a lot of email in a day. So, but I think for me, that's probably the thing that's changed most is just the technology.
And I love it. I mean, and that's from someone that, I probably shouldn't say this, but I still dictate. Not often.
You Luddite.
Exactly. That's what I say.
But although it's done, I love it on my iPhone because now the voice texting's awesome. And I think my dictating has made that much easier. But truthfully, I mean, I'm still, when I turn my computer power button on or hit Control Alt Delete and it works, I'm thrilled. But once it actually powers up and I know it's working and it's connected, I mean, that tool, whether it is on my phone or whether it's at the office, we are required to respond immediately. However, I still spend a lot of time on the phone. And I think one of the dangers with all of the technology is to lose the human element. And so I will often return an email with a phone call because I certainly don't want a quick email to lose context in translation. And I think the human touch still matters. There are a lot of types of law practice where you can sit in an office and never talk to a human. We've chosen not to have that type of law practice, and I think that's purposeful. I mean, we like what we do and take those changes in stride.
Given some of that, you've recognized that your client is the city through the council. We have a 7-member council. How do you address the evenness of information?
That is, in many respects, up to you. I would tell you that I have some clients that, I mean, I think it is my burden to make sure you are all getting the legal advice you need to make good decisions. But ultimately, it is your burden to make good decisions. My burden to give you the legal advice to allow you to make those good decisions. I have advised many councils that are 4-3. And so the issue of making sure that everyone has the same information to make good decisions is critical. With email, that can be a struggle. For example, one of my clients, the council can ask me any question, anytime. You know, there's no limitation on time for any project, for example. But once I have a work product, I send it to the council member that asked for it and copy the remainder of council. We're not tools to be used within a council. And we need to be aware of the fact that sometimes it's an unfortunate part of our practice, but sometimes someone will ask a question in a certain way to get an answer. And we have to be aware of that. And we have to advise our client on the law, understanding that you all live in a political environment. And I think you saw in our RFP response, and maybe we overemphasized it, but I would like to think that our success over the years is based in part on staying a country mile away from policymaking. It's not our role. We're not elected. And so our job is to give legal advice that allows you to implement the policy you want. Now, you might be 4 of you, but that doesn't mean the other 3 don't get the same level of advice to be able to make the same judgment call as to whether something's a good idea. And so we always have to have that piece in mind. When we're talking to one individual on the phone, if one of you asks me what I told someone else, I'm going to tell them. You are all the client.
Right.
So.
Now, that leads me to probably the next piece, which I think may be related, which is you've used a term of art called risk assessment. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes. I always wonder how crass I should be when I say this, but our job is to give legal advice, not to tell you whether it's a good idea. So there may be policy you want to implement that is risky. It's, again, not our job to tell you whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but we can certainly tell you if there's going to be a risk associated with it. And I'll give you an example from last night at a public meeting. There was a discussion about how close to have what are called limited duration signs, again, content neutral. What we're really talking about is garage sale signs, how close to have them to the intersection. And part of the discussion as to why to have them a certain distance from the intersection was safety, traffic safety. The idea that as someone gets closer to the intersection and they see a garage sale that says go right, and someone's in the left lane and decides to make that last minute right turn, you want to give as much room as possible to make that decision. And there was a discussion about how close is too close. And so I did some risk evaluation as you got closer to the intersection. And I think that's I think a good example of risk assessment. Employment law is full of risk assessment. There are often employees that, you know in your gut for a variety of reasons aren't a good fit. But there may be associated risk with that based on a whole host of factors in a municipal environment. And what may be a very good idea in terms of some sort of employment decision is risky. And so we'll advise as to risk in that context.
Thank you.
Bruce?
Maybe to follow on that conversation, legal advice is almost always fraught with multiple shades of gray and interpretation. So help us understand a little bit about how you communicate the pros and cons. I mean, something can be risky. There may be a handful of pros, handful of cons. I mean, it's all situational to the issue at hand, obviously, but generally, how do you approach something like that?
It is going to depend on the issue. I mean, if it is significant enough, we're going to give you something in writing that says, here's what the law is, here's where there is gray, here's where there's risk.
But here's the I mean, I think we like to give a recommendation. We like to go through and give the risks and then make a recommendation.
Pro and con?
Well, I mean, again, if there's an ability for us to say, here are the pros, here are the cons, and here's where we come out on it from a legal perspective, not from a policy perspective, I think that's helpful to our clients. You know, the idea that we're going to say, here are the risks, here are the pros, here are the cons, and now it's up to you. Again, if it's a policy decision, yes. But if we can make you a recommendation that says we think this is a better idea from a legal perspective, that there is a huge amount of legal risk with this decision and very little legal risk with this one, we're going to let you know.
And I'll give you an example of that. The medical marijuana discussion is a good one, because if the policy direction is we want to limit the number of plants that you can grow in a residential structure, there's a whole host of ways to do that. And we can advise as to the various risks associated with them and say, this is the way we recommend. And so that's how, for example, many of our clients have building code provisions that limit the numbers, because there were a whole host of options. That was our recommendation.
Okay. All right. Great. I guess the other thing I was just going to ask you, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've got in here your guys' fee schedules or schedule. I didn't, and this may be, you didn't put in here anything having to do with an annual estimate or a fixed fee kind of arrangement or such and such. Can you ballpark what you think a range of likely annual cost for your services would be, high, low, given some sort of assumption regarding, office hours and this kind of thing?
Yeah, and the office hours is the huge wild card.
I understand.
But I would tell you that on the busiest month for some of my larger municipal clients, it is rare to have over 200 hours in a month. I mean, that's so you can certainly multiply that out. Now, that doesn't necessarily include if there's special counsel associated with it, but that would be on the high side. That's involved in litigation. But I think there's also a level of, or a kind of a leveling off. If there's not litigation, kind of the daily, it's going to be significantly less than that. Significantly.
Not to interrupt, but going to the fixed fixed fee. I think you mentioned that as well. We've done that with some of our clients, and I'll be honest with you, we are willing to do it, but we don't find our clients to be very happy with that arrangement. So, we are certainly willing to look into that if that is something that you all would want to look into. Again, we've done it with a number of our clients, and what we've agreed to do is let's try it for 3 or 6 months, and I will tell you in each case, the client said, we liked it better the other way. So.
And I guess I would also say that you have someone now, as I understand it, that is a deputy city attorney in-house. That is a huge opportunity and a huge, I think, part of the discussion, because having someone in-house minimizes the cost, I believe, significantly. Again, when we look at the numbers, I don't think I have ever had a legal budget in excess of $350,000. Okay? And so when I kind of work that through on an hourly basis, that number has worked. Now, that may not include special counsel, but that's for the busiest of the municipalities we represent. And again, I know you asked the question in the RFP about the deputy city attorney. We know it works in Lakewood. They've had that system for a long time.
I have that in Morgan County right now. I took over in 2011 as the Morgan County attorney, and they have retained an in-house attorney, deputy county attorney, and we're very clear that that was their intent at the time I interviewed, and it's worked extremely well. We have good communication. He is there. He's there full-time. He has an office at Morgan County. I am there when I need to be. We communicate when we need to be, but it's been very helpful for me as well. There's institutional knowledge, and and we're able to cover for him if he goes on vacation and vice versa. It has worked extremely well, and so while there may be issues, I see it as a benefit.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thanks very much for
Thank
the
you all.
opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have a safe short drive.
Take like a 5-minute break. Take a 5-minute break. Thanks, Council.
So he knows he can't influence me at the game.
That may be it, Jim. Very possibly, so. It would.
I'll tell you what, he's got that right.
I was going to say, are we going to argue?
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Excellent.
Well, welcome. We have an hour, so I've got 8 questions. Actually, it ends up being about 7 questions, I think. And we'll run through those, and then if we have some time left, then there may be some questions from council. Okay? Do you want to start by... I predict there'll be 2. I predict so.
I'm sorry.
So if you want to start by introducing yourself, that'd be great.
Great. Well, thank you for having us. My name is Ken Fellman. I'm a partner in the law firm of Kissinger and Fellman. I brought Nancy Rogers from our office with me tonight. Nancy is one of our associates. I recognize that you are exploring a variety of different ways that legal services might be provided to the city, and depending upon, one, if you choose our firm, and then which model we go with, Nancy will probably be the most likely person in the firm that would periodically be offering some assistance, and she has some areas of expertise that we believe would be helpful to our ability to provide services to the city. So I thought it would be a good idea to bring her, just so you could put a face with a name, and if you have some questions that fall within her area, she'll be happy to join in.
Great, thank you. First question is, what do you know about the city of Littleton, and how would you propose to meet the city's legal needs?
Well, there's a variety of things that we know. Let me first start, I guess, on a maybe a downer note, and offer our condolences to you for the loss of your police officer, Officer Denner. It's impossible to read the headlines about what's happening in Littleton these days without coming across that. And having been involved in local government for a long time, I know what kind of an impact that has. So our condolences to you all. We have done some research on what some of the hot issues are now. We know about some of the moratoria that you've been dealing with lately on a couple of different issues. I think from a historical standpoint, having read our proposal to you, I am a former elected official, having served as the mayor and city council member in Arvada. And during those years and working with folks from Littleton, it always struck me how much synergy and similarity there was historically between Arvada and Littleton. I think people came to both communities back in the 1800s because of gold, didn't find much of it. Both communities became farming communities. Both cities in the 1800s had flour mills that were the economic driver of the community. And then fast forward to today, I think Arvada and Littleton are unique among all of the cities in the metro area in that they have preserved a historic downtown area. And I know we've done some joint, we being Arvada, have done some joint marketing with historic downtown Littleton. Present day values of the importance of historic preservation, I've always felt a kinship with Littleton given the similarities that I've seen with my experiences in Arvada. So, and Nancy grew up right near here.
I grew up here. I grew up in Littleton, but I found out in 2001 it was actually Centennial. So I grew up right near Southland Mall. I went to Arapahoe High School. I went to Mark Twain and then went to parochial school. But my mom still lives near Southland Mall, and we still head to Littleton. Grew up going to Western Welcome Week, coming down here for all sorts of things. I was thinking about all the things in Littleton. My dentist, Dr. Vasic, was up on Broadway, and going to the monastery to see the nuns with my mom. Just Littleton's a big part of my family history, and it still is a part of my current family history. We take our children to the Littleton Museum all the time. We come to Toast a lot because that is easily one of the best breakfast places in town. So I really do love this place and try to keep it near and dear because it is.
Okay, and the second part of that is, how would you propose to meet the city's legal needs?
Well, let me say that as we've read your proposal, and I've spoken a little bit to Michael about some of the questions that we had, it seems to me that the primary objectives that you have are for comprehensive, timely, efficient, and effective provision of legal services. Our firm has been around since the late 1970s. Rick Kissinger started our law firm in 1976. I've been with the firm since 1984. And over the years, the firm has grown in a way where about half of our practice is public sector work, and that's mostly my practice. Half of the firm's practice is private sector work. So we have experience working both for business and for government, and we have developed the kind of attitude and work ethic that enables us to meet our clients' needs on a pretty regular and successful basis. So as far as meeting Littleton's needs, we're going to get into some of these issues, I suspect, in a little bit more detail. It's my understanding from the proposal that the city is considering a number of different variations on a theme for how you want to engage with a city attorney. And we've identified in our proposal the option of retaining me through the firm as the city attorney and having some of our staff provide at least some of the assistance in the services. And we understand that you have city employees, staff, a deputy city attorney, and legal administrator. And one option is to have a city attorney from a contract firm supervise the city staff in providing all of the rest of the day-to-day legal services. And I think there's a third variation of that theme, which is to have that, but also to supplement that where we have people in the firm who might be able to provide some areas of expertise. And I think before we can say exactly how it's going to get done, it would take a little bit more conversation both with the council and the manager and his executive management team to figure out what works best. I would say this when I talk about that sort of modified third version. When we reviewed Michael's memo to you from March when you had your study session to talk about setting up this process, and he pointed out some of the areas in which the city has traditionally hired outside counsel, aside from the city attorney and your local or city attorney staff here. Some of those areas are areas that our firm has expertise: employment law, litigation. I've been privileged to do some work as outside counsel for the city of Littleton. We recently were asked to review your social media policies, and we're happy to contribute to that project. So I think the way we would offer to meet the city's legal needs would be to use our history as a firm that gets things done for our clients effectively and efficiently, and then figure out how to mold the relationship into whatever you decide works best among these different options that we're talking about.
Well, I guess you've already explained that. How would you provide regular on-site office hours to meet the city's needs?
I would tell you what I think would be best, but again, the city is the client, so the city gets to make the call. I think it would be helpful to have the city attorney provide office hours part of certain days, multiple days a week. So we suggested in our proposal 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. And let me stress that these are starting points for discussion from our perspective. We're not saying this is the way it has to be. I'm aware that there are some firms that on city council days, the city attorney is here all day. I know from the work that I do as outside counsel for cities, a lot of times if council meetings on Monday or Tuesday, I'm hearing from staff, I need your memo by Thursday so I can have it in council packets. A lot of the work gets done 2 or 3 days before the council meeting, at least on the staff level. Helping the staff get ready for the council meeting gets done not on council days, but 2 or 3 days before. A lot of the work gets done the day after a council meeting because, for obvious reasons, what happens that night. So my suggestion would be a few days a week, 4 hours at a clip perhaps, maybe a little more, a little less, depending upon needs, and then to be able to adjust as necessary. That being said, if you decided we need somebody here 8 hours on city council day and you were interested in working with us, we would make that work.
And this one is multiple parted. Outline for us your municipal experience in the following areas. And I'll just list them and then you can address it. Elections, land use, community court, employment, IGAs, home rule, charter interpretations, and ordinance drafting.
Some of those are going to overlap. All right. And elections will be one of those areas. I served as a city attorney for Cherry Hills Village for 5 years, and we did a lot of work in the area of election law, and some of our other municipal clients as well. We've been town attorney in Empire since the mid-1980s, pretty long time. So we've helped their town clerk manage many elections. At Cherry Hills, working on intergovernmental agreements for coordinated elections with the county, negotiating the contract with the company that printed the mail-in ballots. Last year, very difficult situation trying to coordinate with the county or the city clerk, the company that did the ballots, and very angry citizens when the ballots were not delivered in the mail on time, and discussing options that fortunately never had to be pursued about what happens if they really never get here. So that was kind of a unique situation. We have drafted election provisions of city charters to be changed. In Cherry Hills' last municipal election, they adopted 2 separate charter changes, one on the dates of their municipal election, and the other charter provision wasn't an election provision. And interpreting charter provisions on the clerk's obligations in connection with the election. We had an issue a number of years ago in Cherry Hills where there was a question over what the clerk's responsibility was to citizens with respect to providing petitions for initiatives and referenda. And there was language in the charter that impacted that. So part of our work was to interpret that and help the clerk manage her responsibilities. We also work regularly for the Clear Creek Metropolitan Recreation District, and we have managed their elections for a number of our local government clients. We have periodically helped them cancel elections when there have been only one candidate for office. I was actually at one point earlier in my legal career retained by the city of Longmont to serve as a hearing officer to address issues regarding the validity of signatures on recall petitions. That was a fascinating experience. So we've had a little work for that. And then for Cherry Hills and for the city of Longmont and for the town of Timnath, we have drafted ballot language dealing with election matters put before the voters. So that's kind of the issue on elections. So then your next one was land use, right?
Yes.
We have rewritten the Town of Empire Land Use Code twice in the years that we have been town attorneys. Again, thinking back to Cherry Hills, they had a lot of land use issues. They recently completed comprehensive amendments to their master plan that we were very involved in. We have advised planning commissions and boards of adjustment, city councils, boards of county commissioners, and some of the county work that we've done on handling a variety of different land use applications, rezonings, those kinds of issues, variances. City code amendments is sort of as a land use and ordinance drafting issue relating to lighting issues. Cherry Hills has a pretty new ordinance on bulk plane standards and a green building code ordinance that they've adopted not too long ago. We've dealt a lot with home occupations over the years for multiple municipal clients. My particular area of expertise outside of general municipal practice is telecommunications and utilities, so I've done a lot of land use work in connection with the siting of wireless facilities, and both on individual applications as well as negotiating leases for local governments who are leasing their property for these uses, as well as rewriting codes for local governments to deal with how they site these facilities. Redevelopment plans, there's a number of land use issues related to the new public safety building that Cherry Hills recently opened together with South Metro. and we were involved in that. Nancy did a lot of the contract work on that project. So, and then some urban renewal work that I did for 3 years for the Timnath Development Authority, which involved a lot of land use work regarding retail and development agreements. And there's also, there's other stuff to throw in there too, probably parks and open space acquisitions, railroad crossing issues, all of those sort of have a land use component to it. Outside of my legal practice, in my volunteer work that I did in Arvada, I served on the Planning Commission, including a few years as chairman, and then went to council and then became mayor. So sitting on your side of the dais, dealing with land use issues is another area in which I've had a lot of experience. Okay, after that, court, right? Nancy is the prosecutor in Empire and Georgetown now. Many years ago, I used to do municipal court prosecution. I don't do that anymore, but we do it. We have done appeals of municipal court decisions to district court. We have actually taken one case to the Colorado Supreme Court, upholding the jurisdiction of our municipal court in that particular case. We also are experienced in managing a contract prosecutor. I know that you have a contract prosecutor right now. We mentioned in our proposal that we could do the prosecution if you'd like. We think very highly of your prosecutor. We're familiar with her firm, and we've done business with them before, and we're very comfortable working with, as the city attorney, supervising a prosecutor who happens to be a member of another law firm. I would also say that one of the things I found in that role as someone who was not doing the prosecution but was managing basically the municipal law office was coordinating on how things are happening in court that could affect potential municipal liability. And I had an experience once with a municipal judge who was issuing orders in a way that my prosecutor had a concern about and my police chief had a concern about, and was wondering whether it was appropriate and whether it could ultimately create some liability on the part of the municipality, which led to some research on my part and then led to an uncomfortable but productive discussion with the municipal judge about changing his policies in order to accomplish what he was trying to accomplish, but to do it in a way that minimized potential liability to the municipality. So a number of different elements of managing a municipal court, even when you're not doing the prosecution directly. What was after that? Employment. Okay. We have drafted personnel policies for a number of both public sector communities and our private sector clients. That Nancy's one of her areas of expertise is employment law. She has some experience working with Mountain States Employers Council before she came to work with us, and she does a lot of the work that we do that has to do with employment, and that includes drafting policies. She has done. One of the critical areas that I think your city attorney is going to do is counseling with your management staff on employee issues, whether it's discipline or termination. So many things that end up in civil rights cases or EEOC cases or federal court litigation could have been avoided with a little bit more careful planning and making sure that the discipline was imposed at the right time with the right basis, as opposed to how it might have unfolded. So a lot of the work that we've done have been working with management staff when employment decisions have to be made and making sure they're done in the right way. We've done a lot of work at the firm. I used to do more of this when I was younger. I don't do too much of it anymore, but Nancy does, and that is working on defending EEOC and Colorado Civil Rights Division filings, and also defending federal court. And most of those cases are filed in federal court, but sometimes state court employment claims. I would consider the project that we recently did for the city of Littleton on helping your staff develop a social media policy for employees as part of the employment law framework. I think prior to that, Michael actually had us review also your policy for the use of tablets by employees, and we, yes. So, that's another area. And then I would say also another big area is employment contracts. I'm assuming your city manager has a written contract. Although we have, we've been retained as special counsel at times over the years by the city of Sterling, the city of Aurora, to work on some employment contract issues with the city council's employees, the city manager, the city attorney. And then there's another organization that you may have heard about if you've read the news or watched television or follow the internet about technology issues. And there's an organization in Colorado called EagleNet, which is the recipient of a $100 million federal grant to build a statewide broadband network. I serve as their general counsel, which has made the last 3 years extremely interesting for me and sometimes stressful. But I think initially they hired me in part because they are an intergovernmental entity. A lot of the work that we've done for them has been employment law related and not telecommunications related, because no matter what kind of entity you are, you've got to hire employees, you've got to have employment contracts, you've got to make sure you comply with the law when you have discipline issues. So that's kind of a recent history on employment. IGAs. All right, so we talked about some of them on the elections, part of that coordinated election issues with the county. We've done IGAs with Denver for the use of Cherry Hills law enforcement for the Democratic National Convention when it was here a number of years ago. We had an IGA with South Metro for the construction of that new public safety building in Cherry Hills. We've done rights-of-way IGAs. I've done a bunch of those for this EagleNet entity with CDOT. City agreements with Arapahoe County for officer training. We've done IGAs with counties for animal control services. I think we have one for noxious weeds in Empire with Clear Creek County. We've done some work. I've done some work with some of these Southwest COG communities in La Plata County and Montezuma County on some IGAs on some shared telecommunications network issues that they're working on down there. And then we've also created, these are IGAs that are project specific. They're basically contracts between multiple governments to do a project. State law also allows separate independent intergovernmental entities to be created by IGA when two or more governments get together to create a separate entity. Littleton for years was a member of what was called the GMTC, Greater Metro Telecommunications Consortium. You may recall a few months ago they changed their name to the Colorado Communication and Utility Alliance, and they switched from being an intergovernmental entity to a nonprofit corporation. Kelly Nardi is your representative to CCUA, but we are general counsel to that organization. When Michael was in Summit County, there was a sort of a smaller version of that called the Summit County Telecommunications Consortium, which was Summit County, Frisco, Dillon, Silverthorne, and Breckenridge. And they coordinate together on cable and other telecom-related issues. And I think Michael served as president of that one for a while. So we created that organization too. So that was an IGA to create a separate independent entity, and that's what the EagleNet Alliance is. It's an IGA entity as well. So variety of IGAs. Charter, was that the next one? Home Rule Charter?
Yes.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about charter amendments related to elections. We've done a number of charter issues relating to parks and open space. Cherry Hills has some new charter provisions dealing with parks. We've had to interpret charters dealing with the role of the mayor versus the council versus the manager in some communities. It is even with, well, many communities are council manager form of government. The charters are not all the same. Sometimes the mayor has other responsibilities that can be delegated to the manager, but technically under the charter are the mayor's responsibilities, so you have to have the paperwork right to make sure that the council manager form of government is properly effectuated. I have defended or been involved in litigation to support home rule authority for the city and county of Denver in a case that went to the Colorado Supreme Court, so well-versed in all of the research on the different cases that interpret what is home rule authority versus what is a matter of statewide concern, where does the state law trump the charter or vice versa. I've testified at the General Assembly in support of home rule authority in some cases, and we also have a process in Arvada where every 10 years the City Council appoints a charter commission to study work with staff, study the charter. Sometimes it might need a couple of tweaks, sometimes it might need a major overhaul, but there's this process that happens every 10 years where a group of citizens get together to work with staff and usually hear from staff or what are some of the problems that staff has had in administering or interpreting conflicting or confusing parts of the charter, and then they recommend to council, do we want to put these issues on the ballot to modify our charter? The last time Arvada did that was a couple of years ago, and the council appointed me. Now, this is post-mayor career, so I served on that commission and sort of got to see the process. And then one recent issue of interpreting a charter that I haven't billed anybody for was I tried to interpret your charter on this issue of, how does the council-appointed city attorney that's coming from a private law firm working with employees of the city who technically work for the city manager, how does that whole process work? And I think it can work. The charter's not completely clear on it. And again, I suspect if you are interested in working with us, we will have a further discussion about that. But we spent some time looking through your charter to make sure that we could say, yeah, this can be done. We can make this work. And I think it can. So, ordinance drafting. There's a lot. Some of it is sort of small town, larger city stuff. I think of some of the kinds of ordinances that Empire has had to do over the years, and some of them are pretty amusing. But land use ordinances, ordinances approving contracts, budget amendments, some of these are not ordinances, but resolutions, appointments to various boards and commissions, public safety, sort of general offenses, ordinances amending public safety, barking dogs, home occupations, new compensation plan, getting that into code, just about the widest variety that you can imagine. When it probably says more about my age and how long I've been doing this than anything else. But I feel pretty comfortable that we've done a lot in that area. And I'll just say as an aside, one of the things we did when we started working with Cherry Hills was we sat down with the staff and tried to identify what are the kinds of ordinances that keep coming back. If you have a simple kind of land use matter or an ordinance to approve a contract through the Public Works Department, what are the kind of things that we can sort of come up with a template, and then we don't have to draft. The city attorney doesn't have to draft the ordinance. Staff can draft the ordinance. Staff can draft the memo to council and send it to us the week before and say, how does this look? And 9 times out of 10, we say it's okay, and then there's a little provision in the staff report that says, I've run this by the city attorney and it's okay. Or we may need to tweak it or make comments to it. So part of ordinance drafting is figuring out where do you really need the city attorney and where can the city attorney help staff be more effective.
Great. Do you work with anyone that's not home rule?
I'm sorry?
Do you work with anyone that's not home rule?
Yes.
Empire is a statutory town.
Oh, okay. So then, what distinguishes the advice that you would provide between someone who's not home rule and someone who is?
Well, the difference is if you're not a home rule municipality, the scope of your authority is based upon state statute. So whether it's the town of Empire or whether it's this intergovernmental entity that I referenced, EagleNet, or whether it's a recreation district, when they are talking about what can we do, in this particular area, the legal answer to that question is found in the state statute. If it's a home rule municipality, like some of the other, like Cherry Hills, like Timnath, then the answer to that question first is there charter authority for this? Usually there's an ordinance that implements the charter provision, and occasionally there is an issue of, is this a matter of statewide concern, and has the state preempted local authority in this area? So it's simply a matter of looking at what's the underlying foundational source of the municipal authority. For a statutory town, it's a state statute. For a home rule municipality, it's a charter.
Describe what you believe the city attorney's role should be with the following parties. You kind of touched on some of this: the city council, citizens, management, and employees.
So let me start this way. The city is the client. The municipality is the city attorney's client. Obviously, that doesn't answer the question. So what does that mean? Under your charter, the city council hires the city attorney, and the city attorney serves at the pleasure of the council. So in the first instance, the city attorney is answerable to you. The council's role is to set the policy and the goals for the organization, to adopt the laws that govern the organization, and to hire a city manager to carry out and accomplish your goals. So while there's the primary client obligation to the council, and at the same time, and I would say most of the interaction that the city attorney is going to have is going to be with the city manager and his executive management team, because carrying out your goals is his day-to-day obligation, and when he needs legal help or a member of his staff needs legal direction in how to do that, he is the client basically standing in your shoes as the one who is designated to get this work done. So there's this combination between primary obligation to city council and most of the time working day-to-day with the manager and his staff. It periodically is necessary to advise a council member that the council member individually is not the client, especially when you're paying an outside attorney by the hour. I made this mistake very early in my legal career. I think I'd only been practicing law 3 or 4 years, and we had a mayor in Empire that everybody loved and respected, and he would be the designated person, not because there was any formal action taken, but he would call and say, I need this work done or research this or that, and then he left office and somebody else came in and we just continued that practice. It turned out the council didn't like what the mayor was doing and wanted to know why they were getting all these legal bills when there weren't 4 votes that had authorized this project to be done. That taught me a lesson. And so part of my role as city attorney, if Councilmember Cole calls me and says, I have a question about this issue, I'm happy to answer the question. If it looks like it's going to be a research project that's going to cost the city a bunch of money on the next bill, I will respectfully say, is this something that there's council direction on before I do that work? And that same rule applies to city employees as well. If a city employee asks for something, again, it depends upon the kind of relationship that would be developed with the manager. I've known Michael for years and have had the pleasure of working with him periodically. And I suspect that we would develop the kind of relationship where he would say, if one of my department heads calls you and wants some legal advice on something, I'm okay with that. But if he'd rather that it all goes through him, then that's fine too. Occasionally, employees that are further down in the food chain will ask those questions, and part of the city attorney's job is to manage those expectations properly. And the one other thing I would say about employees, although it does apply to everyone, we've experienced it more with employees, this is sort of a blessing and a curse. We think we've done a really good job over the years of developing good, positive working relationships with the city staff people and the council members that we work with. Occasionally, that leads to an employee that's having a problem with her or his job coming to one of us and saying, can I talk to you? And Nancy had this come up a couple years ago. And fortunately, she did exactly what she should have done, which is to say, I'm happy to talk to you, but if it has something to do with the work that we do for this city, understand that my client is the city, and I cannot necessarily promise you that I'm going to keep what you tell me confidential if it involves a potential liability issue that I think I need to bring to the city attorney or the city manager. And the person said, thank you for letting me know that, and that was the end of the conversation. So there's that. And the one that I left out is citizens. So any city employee needs to be respectful and courteous to citizens. Sometimes working with citizens the job is in part managing expectations. And some citizens believe that I'm a taxpayer, I pay your salary, and I asked you a question about legal advice, and I expect you to give it to me. And you need to politely explain to them that my client is the city of Littleton, and I'm happy to give legal advice to those designated representatives of my client who ask for it. If there's information I can provide that's easily available or can direct you to where to find something or what member of staff is in a better position to answer your question, obviously happy to do that. But most of the time there's not a problem dealing with citizens as long as you're respectful, but occasionally you do have to manage those expectations of what the city attorney's role is and what the citizen's role is as far as expecting feedback from the city attorney.
Describe a situation when you were involved with something that went wrong with a city client, and what would you do differently?
I have one. Well, if you want to think about it, I'll think.
No, if there's time, we'll get you. I have a good one, actually. It's the crazier one than, I don't have to think about what would be at the top of my list. I just want to be careful about how I describe it. I was the attorney for a municipality that had a female manager who was extremely strong-willed and was a little bit of a control freak and liked to make sure that she was the only one who knew all of the information that was pertinent to any issue, so pieces would be parceled out to other folks in the loop. This community, and what I'm about to tell you has all been in the local newspaper in this community, so I want to make sure you know I take my ethical obligations very seriously. The town also had a very strong-willed female mayor, and there were times where the two of these women worked unbelievably well together and were great teammates and did really, really good things for the municipality. And there were other times where they were at each other's throats, and it was painful to watch and difficult as the town attorney, and it was difficult for the rest of the staff to get things done. And it got to a point where the manager approached me and said, I can't get my work done, and my staff can't get their work done, and people are being bullied, and people are being threatened, and we want to have an executive session and bring this to the council, and we don't want the mayor at the meeting. That's a highly unusual request. And that is, in fact, what happened, and I won't get into the gory details of the aftermath other than to say it eventually got resolved, and both the manager and the mayor left before their contract and or term were up. But here's what I would do differently. I would have called Sursa sooner. I felt like I had some reasonable ideas and how to navigate through a very difficult. I mean, you had employees who were scared to death to talk to the council, even without the mayor in the room, and they did, rightly or wrongly, they felt threatened. It was a terrible situation for this organization, and something needed to change. And ultimately, Sursa did get involved and provided some good counsel and assistance and basically helped this community get to the finish line in a way that, I think in hindsight there's a lot of things that people would have done differently, but it worked out. So when you ask what I would have done differently, given that unusual and uncomfortable of the situation, I would have gotten them involved sooner. I would have at least asked for help. But even that would have been tough now that I'm thinking about it, because the city attorney generally isn't the designated official that has the authority to call CIRSA and report a claim. So I probably would have had to go to the council first and say, I've had this request to have this meeting without the mayor involved, and in this particular community, it was the council that had to give authorization to turn something into CIRSA. So I would have had to navigate through that one too, now that I'm thinking about what I would have done differently. But anyway, it was a struggle, and it was uncomfortable. And it was, it's hard for me. Every community I've ever worked with, and again, having been on your side of the dais, I know that the vast majority of people who do what you do it for the right reasons, even when there's honest disagreements about important matters of public policy. And that has caused us to develop these relationships where we end up really liking and wanting our communities to be successful. And it was very painful for me to go through that process. So,
Thank you. In the event that you are selected to provide legal services to the City of Littleton, do you or your firm have any existing relationships with Inglewood, Centennial, Highlands Ranch, South Metro Fire Rescue, or any relationship or cases that would create a potential conflict of interest?
Maybe. Let's think about that. So I do special counsel work on utility matters and cable matters. And I'm actually just finishing negotiating a new franchise agreement for the city of Englewood with Xcel Energy. I don't know, I don't believe that would be a conflict of interest, but it is an affirmative answer to, do you do work for Englewood? Similarly, my firm has periodically been retained by the city of Centennial to help them on utility and telecommunications issues. And in fact, there is a pending matter. It's a small matter, but it involves streetlights. And the city of Centennial and the city of Littleton and the city of Golden have all chosen to work together and try to address this issue, and I have been retained to work on that matter. So I'm working for Centennial and for Littleton on that issue. I think, let's see, a couple of years ago, I'm not doing anything for Arapahoe County right now, but I did rewrite their land use code relating to siting of wireless facilities a couple of years ago. And because we are general counsel to the CCUA, the Colorado Communications and Utility Alliance, that is an organization in which Littleton is a member, but Centennial's a member and Arapahoe County is a member. And so there are those at least possibilities that there would be an appearance of a conflict. I would tell you that if you chose to work with our firm, and if the council's direction was, we don't want you doing special counsel work for any of those communities, even if it's not on a matter that impacts the city of Littleton, then we would abide by your wishes and we wouldn't do special counsel work for them anymore. But because it is, I mean, these are apparent conflicts of interest. Conflicts can always be waived. Oftentimes they are waived when the client does not perceive that the work that you're doing for another entity would really conflict with a real interest, legal interest that the city might have. But that being said, it's the council's authority to waive or not waive that it's not the city manager's authority, it's not the city attorney's authority. So we would bring that to your attention, we would explain the situation, you would give direction, and we would follow it.
Great. Why do you believe that you have the adequate capacity, meaning time and staff, to provide legal services to the city of Littleton?
Let me start by mentioning kind of a little bit more about the philosophy of our firm. My law partner, Rick Kissinger, started the firm in 1976. His background is in the private sector. He came to the private practice of law after working as in-house counsel for a large trucking company. So his job was hiring lawyers and managing lawyers and reading legal bills and making sure that his company wasn't getting screwed or overpaying for the legal services, and making sure people returned his call in a time that he felt was appropriate, and was not always successful. So when he opened up the law firm, he has a very, very strong philosophy about client service. The private sector work that we do, most of it is for small and medium-sized businesses. So we return calls promptly. We, if somebody in the firm can't handle, is on vacation, is not available to get a client's work done, we try to have somebody else in the firm who is available to get something done, so that there's always someone that that can be called. And so I start with that, with our philosophy of service, which we have obviously carried over to our public sector work. I've been with this firm since 1984, and I've been a partner and part owner since 1989. So I have seen the ups and downs in our metro economy over the years, and have lived through a couple of really high highs and some really low lows, and have learned some tough lessons. And we expand when we need to expand, and we contract when we need to contract, as painful as that is. We actually are looking to hire a new attorney sometime this summer. And I would say that having a client like the City of Littleton, the kind of work that you're anticipating needing to be done, whichever model we follow, would be significant for us. And I would not even consider applying were I not confident that I had the time to commit to getting your work done effectively. On top of that, and I would say, I mentioned that we were city attorney for Cherry Hills Village for 5 years. I'm no longer city attorney. Fortunately, I've stayed quite busy since that ended, but my other experience with at least a large, time-intensive client is this EagleNet organization. That actually has consumed most of my time compared to my other clients for the last 3 years. That's a 3-year grant program. And the grant expires at the end of August, and there will be some day-to-day operational work as the organization goes forward. But even in the last 4 months, my work has dramatically decreased for what has been, over the last 2 or 3 years, my largest client. So while I'm fortunate enough to feel like I'm busy and I'm productive, I've had 2 changes in my practice that, to me, makes it a no-brainer that I feel confident that I would be able to devote the time necessary to handle your legal work.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have about 10 minutes. Phil?
Ken, thanks for being here, and as well. You've been involved in municipal representation for a while. How has it changed over time?
Well, I think municipal representation has changed because municipal government has changed. One of the biggest changes that I have seen, if I think back to kind of the mid-'80s when I first started getting involved in this more, is regionalism and intergovernmental work and intergovernmental cooperation. We have all, we meaning the local government community in the broadest sense, we have all had to deal with, how do you do more with less? How do you give the citizens the most bang for the buck? And whether it's, when you're building roads, local streets are one thing, but any arterial street anywhere in this metro area is not a one-city project. Open space acquisition is often not a one-city project. Economic development, we used to have all this competition and fighting between cities. Now we're trying to figure out, and this isn't limited to local government. It's the leadership for this came in large part from the greater Denver Economic Development Corporation, where they said we have to stop fighting with each other and we have to look at what's best for the regional economy in Metro Denver, because if we're all successful, if one city is successful, we're all going to be successful. We had a potential 100-employer, high-paying job opportunity looking at Arvada, and my position was my first choice is Arvada, my second choice is Golden, right? But it's those kinds of things where cities and counties and towns are working together on projects now, whether it's through Dr. Cog, whether it's through Metro Mayor's Caucus, the regional organizations like the CCUA that Kelly's involved in. There's just a whole host of regional kinds of opportunities that local governments have, and city attorneys have followed that lead. We have an active organization through CML, the City Attorney Listserv, that we're constantly on, and people are consistently saying, you know, who's got this kind of a land use forum? Has anybody done this before? Depending upon what the governor does with the firefighters bill, there's going to be a whole lot of discussion that municipal attorneys are going to have to talk about how that's going to have to be implemented. And, you know, medical marijuana, or retail marijuana now. All of these things are issues that we, in the larger sense, face, and regionalism and intergovernmental cooperation has become much more important in managing a municipal law office and providing the best possible legal advice to a municipal client. Aside from that substantive issue, the change in technology has been dramatic, and of course, you know, what we used to talk about as being it'll make us work more efficiently now really means it'll make our work available to us 24/7, no matter what part of the world we're in. So that's a blessing and a curse also, but incorporating new technologies and making new technologies available to a municipal law firm or a municipal law office has been a big part of changes that we've seen over the years.
Second question, recognizing the ultimate client is the city, but it's through the city council. How have you dealt with the evenness of information?
I think it's really critical that everybody gets the same information. No one should ever expect, if you were to contact me and say, you know, I've got an issue.
Thanks for the invitation.
I would want you to know that what I'm telling you is what I would tell anyone else. Now, you know, it's easier when councils don't have to agree all the time. I have heard good things about your council from some of my friends who have interacted with you, in the sense that there's a diversity of opinion, but people seem to respect each other. That's not always the case. I was really fortunate when I served as mayor of having a council that we could disagree, but nobody would walk out of the room and figure out how they're going to undermine the decision that just got made because they didn't get their way. But I know that's not always the case. My wife serves on the school board in Jefferson County right now. She doesn't have that kind of a council. And she has come home, and I said, how come your executive session ended so early? And she said, because when the board president said, we're all making a commitment to keep this confidential, right? They've got one board member who said, no, I'm not making that commitment. And they said, fine, then we're not going to have an executive session. So, you know, it's apt to me. It becomes harder if you end up having somebody who doesn't respect sort of council protocol. But unless you have that situation where you have to figure a workaround, our philosophy is everybody gets the same information, and preferably everybody gets it at the same time and in the same context.
Recognizing this, next question anyway, so recognizing the City of Littleton's home rule, and we have a somewhat dusty charter, will be a way that I'll describe it. What kind of additional challenges does that create for the city attorney?
Well, I mean, it clearly creates some interpretation issues periodically. A lot of times it will not come directly from the city attorney, but it will come from staff, because Michael will have to pick up the phone and say, Mr. or Ms. Attorney, you know, can I do this under the charter? I can't figure this out. I love the process that they have in Arvada, not just because I'm an Arvada guy, but the fact that every 10 years somebody takes a look at the document and says, do we need to make a change, is a good idea. And it's non-political, and at least the commission that I sat on a couple of years ago, there were old-timers, there was a high school student, there were Democrats and Republicans and unaffiliated, and I found in reviewing your charter that there was what I thought was a unique provision in the Arvada charter, but you've got it in yours too. Did you know that you are not qualified to serve on the city council in this city if you are an employee of another municipality? Right? Now, I'm sure the reason that that's in there was for conflict of interest purposes. But you could work for Arapahoe County and serve on the council. You could work for South Metro, but if you're a snowplow driver in Fort Collins, you can't serve on the city council in Littleton if you live here. Now, I'm just a lawyer, so I don't get to tell you from a policy standpoint whether that makes sense or not. But I will tell you in Arvada, our charter commission recommended to council, get that out. I mean, we have state laws that govern home rule municipalities on what conflicts of interest are. If you're going to have a conflict all the time, don't run for council. But the fact that you happen to work for another municipality, especially with all the regionalism we have now, doesn't necessarily, from a policy standpoint, mean that you shouldn't be on council. So Arvada Council put that charter change on the ballot, and our citizens voted it down. So we still share that distinction with the city of Littleton that you cannot serve on council if you're an employee of another city.
Anybody else? Bruce?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, you got a response to numbers that I wanted to compliment as well on the thoroughness. You did a lot of work and nice work on your response to the RFP. But can you sort of high-low give us a range of what you think the annual cost for your services would be? I know you've got the $10,400 per month for the regular office hours and the $5,200 per month for city attorney attendance at meetings and so forth and so on. If you add it all up, what would you think 95% probability would be?
Good question. And I'm actually glad you brought it up because I was thinking we haven't talked dollars yet. And if we get to is there anything else you'd like to say? That was on my list. What we did was we looked at your budget. We tried to estimate what we thought would be reasonable as far as, what could we estimate we're going to be providing services on a regular basis. And that's where we came up with these numbers that, depending upon whether they're at my rate or whether Nancy would handle some of them, we're looking in $180,000, $190,000 for the council meetings and the regular office hours. If you assume, right? Yeah, that's right. Not just council study sessions, planning commission, right? We may have estimated high on that, so maybe that number is a little high because we included licensing boards and 3 meetings of the Historic Preservation Board. I don't know that you need an attorney at 3 meetings a month of the Historic Preservation Board. I would add to that, what if there was 20 hours a month in addition to that outside of the office hours, that the city attorney himself would have to be doing more work, that's about another $50,000 a year. So, I look at somewhere in the low 200s towards maybe pushing 250, but recognizing, too, you're going to have good years and bad years. You get a bunch of litigation that has to be managed, or municipal court cases that get appealed. 1 year you'll have none, the next year you might have 5, and all of a sudden there's an additional $20,000 or $30,000 in legal fees. So, we tried to figure this in some way. Could we make it work for our law firm in a way that was still significantly lower than your legal budget so that we'd be able to work with you on whatever is flexible and makes the most sense as far as providing the other parts of the legal services that are part of this puzzle?
You're a telecom guy, so you'd say that's 5 nines reliability.
Yeah, exactly. I would hope that it's 5 nines reliable. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much.
We appreciate
your
the
time.
opportunity.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ken.
Just as long as we're off the record now, looking at your background, my wife was in the first class of women, and she was a math major, graduated from Notre Dame. And so she's not an actuary. She became a math teacher. She's not an actuary, but
Oh, the first full 4 years or the first graduate?
first full 4 years. She was in the
Okay,
first group of women that were
76 then, right?
Yeah, she graduated in
So
79.
that would have been the first 4 years would have been 76. Because we went co-ed 72.
Right.
Oh, I graduated in 74, but
All right, so just before she got there. When she used to teach middle school math, she would tell kids that she used to date Joe Montana. And they all said, no. She said, where did he go to school? Where did I go to school?
Ken, how are you?
Kristen, help us? Oh.
Played in the band, so she got to go to all the, playing the Gator Bowl.
Yeah, I take 5 minutes. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So council, I think we should have some conversation regarding what we want to do in terms of the firms that we've just spoken to. We've heard from the four. And the question really is there one or two of those that you are interested in? And if so, if there's just one that we want to start negotiations with, or if there's two, just kind of get your input on that. Because what we would do is we would move into, and not tonight, but, right, we wouldn't go into exec tonight.
No, it's a study session.
We would go into exec probably next week to discuss the negotiations of that. So we're not going to discuss any of that right now. Just, if there's not a firm that we're interested in, then we need to make a decision as to if we want to post for a CA.
So I think there's at least one I could be very happy with, I think. But I want to have some discussion.
Okay. Does everybody have at least one? Okay.
That, and I have a question.
Yeah.
I would like some more information. Maybe the city manager can get this for us. I would like something on a better handle on our expected costs for this whole thing, and inverse that against hiring somebody plus a benefit package. I just want to weigh the cost, which way we go.
Yep, and we can get that for you. To some extent, as you've heard from the various firms, it will depend upon what approach you take, because as we discussed at that early study session, the way we put it out was turnkey operations to infill in the vacant city attorney position. And so we've got some suggestions about how to go, and if you guys want to at some point get into that, we'll be prepared. But we certainly can do the base numbers.
And I guess what I'm thinking, because I know what we pay our city attorney, at least the last couple, and I guess whatever percentage of expected fringe type stuff.
Yep, I can get that for you.
Bruce?
Yes, there's a law firm probably of that four that I could live with, and yes, I think it's worth continuing to look. I did look at the budget also, and that was my question, but I feel like within a broad range, this is something that is doable for us within the budget that we have, but I think we should be hard negotiators on this.
And you said that you did want to continue to look?
I want to continue with the process.
Oh, okay.
I absolutely think there's a firm that's represented itself that could fit in here very well.
Okay.
I'm just concerned about the money side, and I want to know that we negotiated very well. And I'm very concerned about, when I looked at the budget, and I know it's a discussion, but we have some very great people working here already, and we need to make sure that, as was discussed by some of the candidates, there are ways to integrate what we currently have with what they would present, and that some of them have the more flexibility to be able to be comfortable doing that than perhaps others. But I think that we have some folks here that we need to make sure that we consider in this decision process, and a couple of them were very willing to do that.
Okay. Bruce?
I agree. I was impressed with several of the firms from the standpoint of their answers, the breadth of services, the breadth of experience that they're bringing to the table. I think the ability to match attorneys and resources to our specific situations, our specific issues is an advantage. Indeed, we certainly have paid for individuals to be city attorney, but a lot of times if they don't have expertise in a particular area, we're going outside anyway to get supplements. So I agree with you, we want to look at the cost side of the whole thing and make sure we're not upside down on it. But I like the fact that additionally, they all seemed, or at least a couple of them were more, I think, assertive on it than maybe all of them were, but a couple in particular indicated that their focus and their client is the council, and they have a relationship and a reputation with us, or with their, as firm owners, that they need to maintain, and therefore strict adherence to the protocols, legal protocols and ethical protocols, I think is very good from the standpoint of firm engagement. And I think it's an interesting and appropriate way to go.
I'm supportive of continuing with the process. One of the things I'd ask between now and next week, when we may be providing some direction around negotiation, is that at least I'm thinking that the next step may be negotiations on multiple fronts, so that there may be a contrast and come prepared for that, because I pretty much had a sense from every one of them that they needed more discussions before they could firm some things up as to how they would approach it, and wanting to make sure we're covering the pros and cons of those different alternatives.
I think one thing to keep in mind is that they were all kind of giving us their broad stroke and kind of honing in on the RFP questions that we asked them to answer. But the real super specific needs, number of hours, availability, those types of things, those are the types of things we can write into the contract.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
Well, I hate to be disagreeable. I have always worked with an in-house city attorney, and that would be my preference. We had 4 very good firms, very interesting firms. Each of them had strengths that the others did not. But my preference would be to have our own individual city attorney. That being said, reading the sentiment around the council table, knowing that proposal probably is not going to go anywhere, I'm going to agree with Mr. Beckman in that whomever we get is going to work with the current staff that we have on board.
Okay.
That was a real crowd killer, Jim. I mean,
I told you I hate to be disagreeable.
this brought us all down, man. Come on.
Jared, did you want to add anything?
Well, Jim's not all that grumpy. No, I agree. I want to see, I really need to see the cost of stuff before I can make. I can go either way depending on what I think it'll cost.
Just as you guys are contemplating the details and whether it's a firm or the costs associated with it, I will tell you that as Kristen and I have worked through, and we've been working with the department heads and thinking about what the level of service need is, and I've said this before, but I want to reiterate it as you guys are thinking about it, we're very comfortable with, from the administrative staff side, that a in-house on the deputy on the 1.0, that's where a bulk of the work is going to be coming in. As you heard from one of the applicants tonight, or one of the firms this evening, the bulk of the work, they work for you, obviously, but the bulk of the daily operations is dealing with the administration of and implementation of your policy directives. And so IGAs, contract amendments, those types of kind of not ongoing items that are fairly consistent and standard and daily operational pieces are what we work with on a regular basis. And so we're very comfortable with that in-house. Once you start getting above it into more convoluted land use pieces or urban renewal authorities or those things, that's going to happen on a less frequent basis. And obviously council meetings, you're going to want your capital CA attorney in there. And so what we have proposed and what we continue to feel comfortable with, certainly through the end of 2013, as you potentially try this back to the future, since I think this is what we've had many years in the past, is a 0.5, up to a 0.5 in that city attorney place. So 1,040 hours prorated to whenever the contract starts, and then see what happens with that. That's what my recommendation would be, with a not to exceed without council authorization for additional funds beyond that. And that's primarily based upon what we see happening from land use projects that are coming in, the other projects that are on our plate as we move forward. So we're comfortable with that from a 2013, and you end up, as I've continued to suggest, that a 1.5 is sufficient in that case. The nice thing about a firm is, if I'm wrong in that case, and you need to push some additional hours because something happens, you can. But if you do it as an up to, you may not use that firm other than council meetings and some specific requests that comes from the body of the council, and you're nowhere near that 0.5. But we've got the in-house staff that can handle the bulk of the things that needs done, and we've got greater coverage, obviously, for firms. So just reiterate what I've said in the past as you guys contemplate this. And that's, Jerry, to your point, I have been thinking about dollars and cents from that perspective, not a full-time city attorney comparing in-house versus a firm out-of-house, because that will certainly end up being a higher per rate if you just do a true apples to apples. But if you shift a lot of the responsibilities to deputy in-house staff, plus, as I've said before and was mentioned today, you move some of that responsibility onto administrative staff, you're even reducing legal costs and reducing workload. So from the legal. So thanks, Mayor.
Okay. So I don't know that we need to do anything else on
No,
this?
I don't
Okay.
think we do.
So
If
do we have time on the schedule to do the exec next week?
Yep.
Okay.
And we put it on there in anticipation of
Okay.
you guys doing that. I guess
Okay,
I would
great.
ask if there's, I'm sorry, Mayor, if there's other questions that you guys have that come up that you want that are negotiation related, and you need some additional information to prep for that, shoot me an email or give me a call and let me know so we can get you that in advance of that.
I just have a question, because Jim referred to it. When Larry Berkowitz worked here, Jim, I don't recall, was he working as a full-time city attorney, or was he working as a appointed part of Berkowitz and Brady and whatever that company was that he was part of?
He was here pretty much full-time. There were times whenever he would be at his downtown office, but he was classified as a full-time employee.
Okay. Anything else on this? Okay. So we'll move to an economic development discussion continued.
We'll see if this works from across the room. So we're going to test our ability here. So for the group, this is our time. We've certainly had an opportunity over the last year and a half, and for some of us even longer than that, to deal with this discussion around economic development. It kind of goes back, at least for Bruce Stallman and I, to the workshop in 2010 when we were given a budget of zero and said, what can you do with it? So it's at least been around for that long. And what we're looking to do is give us an opportunity to kind of chime in, either, hey, we're with it or against it, or we have some of our thoughts, and we can put those out on the table. But we've heard one is making sure that we have a common understanding of the context. There's probably some recognition that maybe the torch has gotten a little bit ahead, and we need to both lead and follow in some of this. A realization, again, that we have an opportunity and that economic gardening is not enough, and sorry about the spelling there, particularly Peggy, but that was so it would fit on the line. And
You're sorry about the spelling or Peggy? What was it? Interesting way you didn't hear the comma.
Yeah, that's okay. You take it how you want in that area. And as we've seen, as mayors and others have come to us and shared what their experience is in their municipality, there's an element of communicate, and we maybe have an opportunity that we haven't necessarily done enough of that. And in that context, somewhat, what are some of the next steps? Now, first part that I'll put out there is a little bit of a premise, is that we all love Littleton, and that it's a wonderful place. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have that. Anyone can go across and maybe pick a whole nother set of pictures. We have 25 years of Littleton calendar that we can choose from. Chris Hargeth only gave me a limited inventory of pictures to choose from. But it's that there are a lot of things here, and you've heard me mention that we have an unenviable set of assets. We have gone out to the folks. This came from the marketing survey in 2010 audit that was done. But there's a lot of those attributes that exist. And if we go to some of those things that have been mentioned through Inspire Littleton, and some of theirs is, this size of the word means how many times things have been mentioned, and certainly that aspect of community is really big in how we feel about Littleton and those things. But also recognize there's some action words that come across in some of this that aren't necessarily in that aspect of just taking care of what we have. We see some words like certainly maintain, but we also hear ones around improve and develop, and so those are also significant that's there. Over the number of surveys, and certainly as folks have come before us, there are some concerns out there that everything's not perfect, and we would certainly say that we have some opportunity for those that are looking at some of the concerns, and particularly in the right-hand column. Sorry about the abbreviations, but in the business survey, the quality of life as a place to work is a question mark. Business retention, expansion, and attraction as an opportunity. Effort needs to be made towards a balanced and sustainable economy, and promotion of Littleton as a location for business, shopping, entertainment, recreation, the live, work, play that's often out there. You can kind of smile at this, but it's one of those things which is, be careful what you're looking for. You may not get it. It's also be careful what you're looking for may have some contradictions and some irony within it. And certainly as we look at the tension point, the aspect of preserving what Littleton has and what we value, but also dealing with change. And change occurs around us. It occurs naturally as demographics change. We're not the same person that we were yesterday. We've gone through 24 hours more of life experience. And so that puts us at the point, and whether you want to describe it as the yin and yang that's out there, that's the symbol that's present. But do you use that in some of your martial arts?
No.
Okay, so that was my one question. Chinese. It's Chinese, okay. And one of the things that we've really been on a course is towards what I'll refer to as intentional economic development. Not taking everything that's there, but certainly recognizing that this balance of where businesses are, where employment is, and where housing is, creates that sustainable environment that not only from a happy community, but also from an economic perspective as we take a look at Littleton. And I'll throw some words up there, and silence means that you're kind of okay with what's here and some of the messaging that's there. If you don't like it, it's an opportunity to interrupt Jerry or Jim.
At what point do you want to interrupt?
At any point, Jerry. But when we're taking a look at intentional economic development, it's that which advances the economic prosperity of the city. And that includes businesses and neighborhoods and the residents that are here. That we're looking at broadening the revenue and the tax base for the city, because like it or not, things don't seem to get cheaper over time. Supports, if not also stimulates, this balanced economic growth as we take a look at our future, and it focuses on this economic sustainability. And we've had certainly some brief discussions about the trajectory of revenue versus cost of services in the city, and as long as we can generate some set of revenue that's not always our money because it comes from sales taxes in what we're doing, being in a position to do good things.
Phil,
Yes?
just so my silence isn't taken as agreement, I really have a problem with the word sustainability. I just think that's one of those words that has come to mean such a varied number of things to different people that it is not it's a word that has meaning that is different to different people. And I think it's problematic. I don't know what word would replace it, but
Vitality.
thank you, Peggy.
Okay.
Your mic wasn't on. You didn't.
Vitality, because
Okay.
that's also in our goals and objectives.
We can I'm not at the computer to change it right now, but you can see that word just changed.
Visualize.
And, when we're talking about that, certainly some of that gets represented in property values and the fact that Littleton, as you take a look at what the county assessor was able to show in property values, our property values have actually sustained better than a lot of areas around Arapahoe County. So we've had some good news, and so that's a challenge. And Bruce, vitality is a better word?
Yeah, I think vitality is a better word. I think that the problem with sustainability is it ties on to things that are environmental, that are perhaps anti-something else. It just has so many different perceptions. And I like the idea of something that is vibrant and is long-ranged and is multifaceted. Those are better ideas to me.
Okay. Do you like the word vibrancy better?
I like vitality that Peggy mentioned, and I think it is in our goals and objectives, as she mentioned.
Okay, got it.
And since you mentioned it, and not to dominate the discussion, but the issue with our housing, having just gone through that whole process, it is a two-edged issue. Our housing is more expensive than comparable housing might be. The mic is going. Our housing is more expensive than it might be 5 miles down the road in any direction. So it's good for property values within our community of those people who already have a stake in it, but it makes it a little bit more different to get your foot in the door and get into the community. And that is, when you compare the quality then and the size to what's 5 miles down the road for that less expense, it is a real challenge. So I don't know whether it's good news or bad news, and I think the whole piece here is relevant.
Well, it's like anything that we have. Moderation is kind of good. Anything to an extreme creates an imbalance in where we are. And as we take a look at the challenges, that's one. How do we make sure we produce on the value? This is a long list of things we've had going on. It's not absolutely complete. I mean, each of us at various points in time have either been at presentations at Metro Mayors or Colorado Municipal League or Dr. Cog that certainly have added to our knowledge base and awareness of what's out there and some of the differences that are there. The thing that's kind of a challenge is if everyone's been watching all of it, they're probably with us. But if they've missed some of that, we may not have fully communicated all those things out to everyone so that they're in that way. And I just remember both Mayor Mike from Glendale and Mayor Bob from Lakewood talking about what was really important in their efforts was having that communication so that folks were on the journey with them. This is the part that is one of those things where may we live in interesting times. Why now? Why the crossroads? The economy, the sentiment within the economy, development is happening, and it's not just happening here, that folks are knocking on various doors, but the availability of funds and resources that are out there. Now, there's also some impact on those, whether we deal with banking laws or restrictions, whether we take a look at what I'll refer to as legislative constipation, the fact that our legislature hasn't dealt with the building defects law, so that's there. And at least I would have an opinion that our discussions haven't been in the back room. We've had a transparency of discussions, but we also haven't done one of those take time out and maybe say, what is it that we need to be making sure that we're communicating? And at least from my perspective, at times when we're in a quasi-judicial mode, that's not the open forum for a conversation, because we're kind of narrowed in our consideration, and we're focused not on the whole city, but it may be on a particular project. And I think we have some opportunity for additional communication, and hopefully this can give us some additional words. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my partner here around still forming, since this is most of his words on this particular panel.
Oh, thank you. I guess the intent of a lot of this was sort of to set the context, and I think I like Phil's visual of the torch, as in if council is leading and carrying a torch to do something, is anybody following, or is anybody in the light? I was writing a note here, and I titled up this section, and I actually mistyped it, and I wrote continues instead of the economic development discussion continued. And then I stopped and thought about it, and I said, actually, that's probably correct. That continued, as far as it being past tense, isn't exactly right. It's the economic development discussion continues. What we were trying to do here is frame, why are we doing this? We've had feedback from a variety of citizens asking, we see a lot of stuff going on, and a couple slides back, you saw the laundry list of, or at least a partial laundry list of everything that we've been doing to invite the conversation and to try to answer the question in red up there, which is, we don't know what we don't know. We know that, generally speaking, there is a balance, that if we go, and we'll see a slide maybe in a little bit that sort of visually represents this, but if we go one direction versus another direction, there are consequences. There are things that we can't control in the macroeconomic environment, whether it's national, state, regional, local. We can't tell people how to spend capital. What we can do is, in deference to the charter, set ordinances that more or less encourage certain types of things to occur with respect to, say, zoning code. Obviously, we can do rezoning decisions. But broadly speaking, in Phil's, the circles that Phil had up there that we're talking about, business, residential, schools, housing, I mean, these are all community stakeholders. And I think we think collectively as a council, subject to an ongoing conversation about how best to accomplish this, that we do have a fiduciary responsibility to all the stakeholders, the citizens, people who own businesses, the citizens who use the school system, because the city services that we provide touch all of those. What this basically is intended to do is extend then the discussion that we've done and we've tried to lay out for people to continue to participate. So how do we tell do a better job of telling the story of the positives and encouraging participation to keep Littleton the special place that it is? The We Love Littleton slide is a visual representation of that. But a lot of this was sort of the website redevelopment project as well, just to make it easier to navigate in and around the city's website so that people had better information and a better customer experience, if you will. But setting the table for future conversations, what knowledge and plans do we need, are necessary to undertaking projects, and we've got a toolbox. We've got a much better toolbox today than we had 2 years ago when this thing more or less started rolling. It doesn't mean that whatever we ultimately collectively try to build with the community and the partners and the stakeholders in and around the community, that we need every tool in the toolbox. But having a toolbox allows us to have productive conversations about how do we use specific tools in certain instances. What can we do as a community is different in all likelihood than what we should do, or what should we do as a community. And so the definition of the toolbox doesn't address the questions ultimately of what we can and what we, more importantly, should do. And that's why we want to have an ongoing dialogue and ongoing conversations about what does this all look like. Phil basically touched on the next bullet, which is people have property rights. If somebody owns a piece of property and they want to do something with it that's within the parameters of the land use code as it exists, and they don't need a rezone request to come to planning board and council, then they have the right, just as we all have our rights, to enjoy our property within the confines of the land use code. Obviously, people sometimes decide they would prefer to do something else with with a piece of property, and that's where rezoning can come in. But the code addresses some of those issues in terms of the highest and best use of the land based on current situations, and obviously we try to take that into account as we make decisions in what is referred to as a quasi-judicial proceeding. But the question we really haven't done, that Denise was sort of lining out with respect to the shopping center presentation, is what, if anything, should we do to incent people to undertake projects that might improve their property as well as the community. And the word up there is probability, and probability, and we talked about this with the attorneys, but probability acknowledges risks. We can do something to incent somebody to do a project that might be beneficial for the community and for their property at the same time. But there is no guarantee that even if we all make a good decision, that the outcome is going to be what we hope will occur, because there are too many variables outside of our ability to control. All we can do is make a decision based on the best information we have. At the same time, risk cuts both ways. There very well may be as much risk ultimately down the road from doing nothing as doing something, and that is really sort of the challenge we have as a council, as a community, with citizens, business owners, partners, regional partners, school, LPS, the whole 9 yards, is, what are the pros and the cons, the puts and the takes to taking one path versus taking another path. Go ahead, Phil.
Oh, go ahead. That's fine. Oh, in this,
Are you moving on?
we can stop.
Yeah, I thought you were going to comment on that one.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm going to back up to the middle. What should we do as a community? I think there's another question. What should we not do? I think you have to look at both pieces of that. And I can't myself imagine further down doing something that improves your own property that wouldn't in some way improve the community. If it really is improving your property, whether it's improving, getting a new boiler or what it is. But I may be short-sighted in that. And then just play devil's advocate, just friendly devil's advocate. The last one, I'd rephrase it just so we hear it two ways. There may be as much risk from doing something as doing nothing, because it's what that something is, right? So I think we really want to be thinking multiply here. But, I mean, this is a good list. I don't mean to
No, that's good. That's good.
bang on it.
Yeah, this open conversation, I mean, we threw this up here for purposes of stimulating this kind of conversation, because when we've received the presentations, I think and Phil and I talked about this when we were trying to frame this, the problem we run into is there's 7 of us sitting up here thinking about these concepts, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that everybody has a different picture in their head as to what these concepts mean. And so part of the problem is, how do we communicate effectively with one another in order to make better decisions if we're all speaking a different language? And hence, exactly what you're saying. Anybody else want to jump in here?
Yeah, I do. The last line there that you have talks about risk, and it mentions that there's as much risk from doing nothing as doing something. I want to throw out another term that in another part of my life was important, and it's something called the action imperative. It's the idea that when nothing is going on, you have this tendency to want to do something, And the problem with things like land use and making grand decisions about the future of a community is, I think sometimes the action imperative fits in there too. You feel like you got to do it, we've got to do something. When the reality, back to your first sentence, is we don't know what we don't know, and the big thing we don't know now is economic trends. Is the curve on the way up? Is the curve on the way down? Where does it all fit? Is it something that looks really good in this snapshot, not going to fit future snapshots, but your action imperative makes you want to do something? And that cuts a lot of different ways. It's not just council, but it's the critics of things the council does or doesn't do. It's part of that feeling that you have to get control and do something.
And Bruce, I'm not sure I would say nothing might be happening, because something's always happening. For example, at least in my mind, we have a changing and aging demographic, getting older. What's the politically correct way to say it? But we have a population that's getting older. Now, I also have 2 young families moving in on each side, so there's a changeover in some of that. So it's not the same. And folks that had lived in Littleton for a long period of time are moving out of Littleton. So there is some change that's occurring. Another is buying behaviors. A lot of the city revenue is dependent on sales tax. Who knows when we're going to get the share that may come through the marketplace fairness, if it makes it through all of Congress on that front. We know that there are some things that are changing. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's an imperative for action, and I'll agree with that, but to say that you're kind of staying the same, I would say we're not. There's change that's happening, and how do we respond to it? And in the last line, not making decisions is a decision. So there's, whether you want to call it an action imperative or not, doing nothing is also a decision point.
I think, Mr. Beckman, I agree with you entirely on your statement, because I think as change is always occurring, without doubt, I don't think we need to get in front of the parade and say, parade, follow us, just because there's change happening. I mean, if we change or try to take effect of what is already happening, we could mess it up. So it always has to be cautious on that. And I think that goes along with your statement, Bruce, is that just because we think it needs to change doesn't mean that we need to be the ones to change it.
I think you've got what I'm trying to say. There was some thought that if you're talking about business and economics and those kinds of things, that's certainly not my expertise. My expertise is public government, municipal government, public operations. It's not business. So my action imperative would be, well, I think I have a good idea of what we should do, but I'll tell you what, I really can't back it up with my personal knowledge. And that's the challenge. I'm saying that is a challenge and a dynamic in this whole recipe of trying to figure out how to deal with change. It's the, it's the old Clint Eastwood, man's got to know his limitations. This is a different mic.
You want to use this one too?
I don't know what happened to this.
No, you're fine, Bruce.
Let me follow on with that. Maybe, again, just to frame it another way, and appreciate what you guys are saying, but the other, it sort of potentially puts change in something of a negative light. And another alternative would be to look at change as an opportunity. And there are opportunities to be taken advantage of. There are opportunities that to be missed for all the right reasons. And I don't know that one is any better or worse than the other. I mean, I think the caution of not wanting to make a bad decision is completely warranted, and maybe it's like the physician's oath. Maybe the issue should be we at best we do no harm. Conversely, in a changing environment, there are opportunities to do things which we can either potentially act on or choose not to act on, and that decision point will have consequences down the road. Right, wrong, or indifferent, and this well predates me. Jim, it may even predate you, no disrespect intended.
Thank you.
Yes.
That was with respect.
Yes, it was with respect. But, my recollection is at one point in time, we had the opportunity to annex in South Glen. That was an opportunity. And at the time, the decision was made to not pursue that course of action, and it set us on a different path than, and it may have been the right decision, it may have been a suboptimal decision. I don't, who knows? At this juncture, you can argue it either way. There's no way to determine it for sure. I'm just saying that we would be having maybe different conversations today if that particular annexation had occurred 20 years ago or whenever the opportunity arose. So don't disagree with what you're saying. I just wanted to, we can shine different lights on all of these phrases, and then they engender different responses, potentially.
And the reason I'm just talking about it as it was back to where's the torch and where's the parade.
Sure.
And I think these are issues that some of those folks are hanging back a little bit, or I used to say, you have folks on this side of the fence and this side of the fence, and the folks on the fence. A lot of the ones on the fence might be thinking thoughts similar to what I'm expressing about concerns about the future, and that these are some of the reasons why. They're very human reasons. There's nothing malicious or suspicious about it. It's just why some folks choose to sit on the fence or maybe hang back in the parade. And I think we need to realize that, because we want the parade, you got to be ahead, you lead from the front, contrary to somebody else talking about leading from the back. You lead from the front, but you can't lead where they can't see you.
Right. That's the meaning of the analogy with the torch, is if you're too far out. We went through this exercise with Civic Canopy, and part isn't the Our Littleton that I wanted folks to focus on. I mean, we do have the circles that are there that Debbie has explained to folks, which is we have the core of Littleton, we have our existing retail and business environments, and then we have kind of the future that's out there. And when we talk about things that are changing, I mean, we now have close to 4,500 jobs that are sitting on Mineral between Santa Fe and just east of Broadway. We're having traffic there. We've taken a look at C-470 and expanding the lanes to possibly deal with some of that congestion. So it's not without some thought as to how that's going to be dealt with, but it's pretty painful for some of us down there in trying to deal with that every day. But the operative piece is planning for tomorrow together. And it's that little byline there, that this is not something that any one of us, or even just the 7 of us, are looking to do alone. It's something that we're looking to do together, and that together is a whole lot bigger than just us. And quite honestly, it doesn't include folks that are just restricted to Littleton, like Littleton Public Schools or South Suburban, and that are partners in working with us. And certainly some of the employers around don't have everything just here. I mean, United Launch Alliance, when they moved their facility, that they're actually working from co-located out at Lockheed Martin's facility, and now they're in Centennial. Well, there's folks that were living in South Jeffco that are now transversing across Littleton, many of those on Mineral Avenue, across the city every day. The other part is, as we take a look at that visual, we also have the city, and this has some mappings on it. We've looked at the, 36 by 36 inch version that we tried to get under the scan, so this is about as close as I could get to getting it onto a slide. But this represents, a few of the projects that are active now, not yet opened. We're seeing some grand openings that are going to be coming. Some of this includes also vacant property like Enzor, or at this point in time the Richardson's property, and also known as Marathon. And it also shows where we have multifamily within the Littleton limits at this point in time, and it's not always evenly distributed across the city, but we have a tremendous diversity as well at this point in time. But that core, as we had that conversation with the planning board of our neighborhoods, and having that, we're not looking to really change the character of our neighborhoods and that sense of community that's very deep here in Littleton. Anything else to add on the map? Anyone? Move on? Okay. We have some momentum, whether it's, you might talk about it, but upper left is the brewery. We used some water fund money to do the police facility. Health South in the lower left is set to have their grand opening on June 27th, and the Anthem Memory Care facility is getting very close. They're working on some of their landscaping right now. But these are not the only ones. We have Mercedes-Benz of Littleton is acquired some additional property, and they're doing renovation. McDonald Automotive is going through theirs. So CarMax on Broadway is some of those things that we've seen. And remember, I don't think we're ever going to question whether we love Littleton. We may all have some different perspectives, and certainly have that. But there are some opportunities that are coming up, and that's why we need to be thoughtful and intentional in what we're doing. Whether we're talking about Enzor, whether we're talking about rehabilitation in our neighborhoods, certainly the point about the property values and the fact that we are commanding higher per square foot price right now in the marketplace. And we have a number of storefronts, and whether it's at an all-time high, I think it's at an opportunity high to say, wouldn't we rather have those spaces rather than being empty? Vital, okay, to use a term. This is next steps. You want to take it, Mr. Stallman?
Yeah, essentially, there needs to be some next steps. And it's incumbent upon us collectively, with as much input as we can get from everyone, again, that's a stakeholder, to figure out what the best next steps need to be. In theory, a next step may be to not do much, but as we've had some conversation here on. However, at a minimum, by virtue of the fact that we've been getting a fair amount of commentary in terms of, or feedback in terms of what's up, why are you guys moving fast, what's happening, Why are you doing the kinds of things you're doing? I think it is incumbent upon us to take the word to the streets, to make it accessible to people, and to have those conversations with people throughout the community. We've, I think, done this effectively with a lot of the businesses that have been in and out. We have the breakfast with people, but we all interact with a variety of people on a day-to-day basis, and the more we have the opportunity to communicate and get feedback, that will help us all collectively be able to communicate it, I guess, as I like to say, in the same language. Because, again, if we've got 7 different pictures in our, between our ears, there's, 20,000 other pictures out there in terms of what the community thinks is or isn't happening and why and what should it be and so forth and so on. For it to be, the success has many fathers, failures an orphan is an ever popular bromide. But I think if we can find a couple of potential projects where we've got low-hanging fruit, is there a project out there where we can have an impact as a catalyst without a huge risk exposure, if it's the right thing to do to get people behind the opportunity to have a positive influence on an outcome, then I think we get a little bit of more, an additional amount of momentum, as I think Phil was talking about. We've seen a lot, the list of things that was up there, I guess 2 of those projects, the 2 health-related projects, weren't really anything that we had participation in because they were all within the confines of the zoning code and people put private capital to work and so forth and so on. The other 2 we had direct relationship with, the police building, obviously, and then the rezone for Breckenridge Brewery. So as momentum builds, it makes it easier for people to visualize or perceive what it is that's occurring and have perhaps more input into the process if they can see something tangible. And maybe that's essentially what we were talking about up there in terms of tangible results versus just ongoing studies and meetings and conversations and presentations and so forth and so on. At some point, I think we all understand, you have to fish or cut bait. But it's got to be an affirmative decision to do something or to not do something, to Peggy's point and to Bruce's point. And so essentially that was I guess a call to action, if you will.
So who is it you're wanting to see?
Say it again.
Who is it you're wanting to see these things?
Well, I think all of the community stakeholders. I mean, I think to the extent that there is activity that's going on, it's not council. At some point, council leads, but everybody else has to charge.
No, so part of I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this. You're wanting maybe investors or businesses or?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think
okay, so
that's one stakeholder group for sure.
In the city or from outside the city investors?
I would say it broadly by virtue of the fact that I think what we said earlier on was we want to try to do a better job of telling the story that is Littleton and why that's a good story. And I think it's easier for everybody to visualize a story if they see physical successes.
No, so it's okay. So, we've got the Alamo Draft House. We've approved something that's not going to be too visible for a couple of years. The brewery, and when it starts going up, people will be noticing more. But I thought Michael had told us that we're getting people saying to him, investors and so forth, that things are really popping around here. And that's good, right? So the fact that things are popping around here, to me, says there's energy, there's things happening, that people are probably incubating ideas of how they might take advantage now while there are opportunities for them to come in and either remodel something, flatten something, and then rebuild or whatever. And maybe that's part of some of my concern is that I think things are happening more than we're realizing. Then it's so obvious. There's obviously interest with the city. People are talking. I mean, you had said, what, 6-8 months ago, Michael? I mean, we're getting all kinds of contacts from people, right? Something to that effect.
We are, and we've got a map that we can bring showing, we looked at it on a residential level, but showing reinvestment in the community.
Yeah. And so part of what I'm thinking a little bit, when the recession started, people didn't, and nobody except me realized it was happening. At least that's the way it sounds. I could see it coming big time, but why all the big people that should have been able to see it didn't, I don't know. But then suddenly we get the word that we were in a recession, and then we get more and more word that it started about a year before anybody thought it started. I mean, before the gurus were saying it started. So my feeling now is in Littleton, things are happening more than the public is realizing. Council is aware a little bit more because of updates we get from Michael. So I guess I'm not feeling this urgency to do something except to make quite aware in ways that we can what's going on. That will then maybe get more people excited and interested and whatever. And I'm thinking, Michael, along that line, that we need to do more on our website somehow with something dynamic with these projects that have recently been finished, are about to be finished, that are just getting started, etc. Just as that when people do some kind of search, they're going to get Littleton's website showing where the action is. I mean, that this is a place that's happening.
I think we've told you guys we're rolling out the business website, I believe, next month.
Yeah.
So that'll be part of that.
And that's what that's going to be doing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you talk about next steps. I think part of our next steps is outlined for us when we got the Economic Plan 2013 presented to us, where it talked about priorities and talked about opportunities. And I think pursuing those things that were presented at that time will be a long way to taking the next steps.
With this, I always like to, with Lorena's assistance, I'm going to try a little bit. Littleton's always had economic development. We've been at the forefront for a number of things. For example, it got mentioned by one of the law firms, when the flour mill was put here, we became an economic hub for the agricultural environment that was happening, but that was moving us in a vertical direction and made some of the end product easier to ship. We have a number of patents that were built here. We have that pneumatic fountain drink that comes out of Norgren that dispenses that sugary water that they don't like in New York or something of that nature. We also have the first four-wheel drive patent was established here in Littleton for a vehicle that was coming and going, so the ability to go in both directions. So, and we have more advances that have occurred. I mean, we have one of the world's engineering firms with a patented approach on scrubbing coal-based power plants and dealing with that. And so, in addition to all the things that are happening on the medical side and what's being embraced on that. And so, we've had a lot. It's going to be one of those things that it is part of our culture, and we need to embrace the. We have had some change. We've dealt with change in a very positive way, and to say this is not willy-nilly. We've been thinking about it for a while, at least in my opinion. It's not willy-nilly, and we're going to be intentional in what we're doing going forward. And I would probably argue that the health facilities that were on the example weren't without some city involvement in dealing with the permitting and inspection and design side. And part of that is setting the sentiment that indeed we're going to be easier to work with, and things aren't necessarily going to be done in a fashion that's just going to expedite it to get to conclusion, but it's going to be done in a quality way. And if you talk to the folks that have been involved in some of those buildings, actually our inspection process helped folks with some of the quality and what's there. And so good things are happening. We're not taking the foot off the quality wheel as well.
Is that it?
I don't know, do you have anything to add?
Good. You got the last one?
So,
I think
or do you want the one with the visuals?
No, I think we've sort of dealt with this. The red lines up there were, sort of to bring it all home. The integrated neighborhoods, commercial schools, city services, they all rely upon one another. So what are the appropriate next steps? But the last slide sort of ends up being the visual of what I think we try to struggle with. So in terms of setting a path forward, there's always the overhanging, I don't know if I want to call it the gorilla in the room, but the issue when it comes to the city is always revenue. And the problem is that some of what we do, if not a lot of what we do, can be perceived to be quote-unquote revenue-driven. And I guess what we were trying to do here was basically say that with all of you can't provide city services without some level of revenue, but I think collectively council understands the trade-off between quality of life and revenue. So hypothetically, if you've got a normal distribution curve and you're way off on one end and you've just got nothing but open space and houses that are not within a quarter mile of your neighbor's house, you're going to have an outstanding quality of life, but you're probably not going to have a boatload of revenue for services. And conversely, if you're at the other end of that distribution and you just have retail, big box retail and so forth and so on, and it's everywhere all the time, you're going to have a boatload of revenue, but your quality of life is going to suffer. And so what we were trying to do with this was acknowledge the fact that when we do planning or we do an economic development think tank and we get a plan and we look at projects and we try to balance out the needs of the community as a council in terms of setting policy, we are looking for the Goldilocks kind of approach. But in theory, just right is no fairy tale. What we're trying to do is carve the middle ground or plow the middle portion of the channel where we can get a reasonable balance. We all want high quality of life, but we need some level of revenue, but it isn't revenue for revenue's sake. It's about the fiduciary responsibility and the services that the city provides being a part of the quality that neighborhoods enjoy, that businesses bring, that the school systems and the partners, the stakeholders, the fire partners and whomever else, the sanitation districts and so forth and so on, that all are intertwined with what we do as a community. So that was essentially what this was trying to do with a visual representation in a fun yet provocative way.
Back to you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the museum fee proposal. Tim, did you want to walk us through this?
Sure.
Everybody has the March 13th memo in front of them, I think. Is that correct?
March 12th.
Or March 12th, sorry, thanks. If not, I've got copies. Well, as you all will remember from our January study session, my charge from City Council was to look at the I think the mayor described it as literally millions of permutations of admission policies across the country, and come back to you with the one that raises a lot of money that doesn't annoy anyone. Sadly, that formula has escaped me. So you can have one, but you can't have both of them. But I think the driving question behind the discussion of museum admission fees was, is there a way to generate a significant revenue stream through museum admission fees? The answer is yes, but it comes with two pretty large provisos. One, you have to charge a market-based fee, which is significantly higher than the nominal fee structures we've looked at in the past. And two, you have to significantly limit the exempted classes, or the classes of folks who don't have to pay the admission fee. So really the only way you can get to a number that's six figures is if you charge everyone, and that would include residents, which obviously is going to generate the most pushback for council. So that's where the big policy question comes in. So what you have in front of you is my memo, a little analysis of the issue, and then I put in front of you 6 scenarios that talk about what level of revenue you could generate under each of these 6 scenarios. And I guess I would come to you with what I would say sort of an either-or recommendation. If the goal is to raise, in north of $100,000, then scenario 6 is the only one that does that. And that, just as a brief overview, is $5 for adults, $4 for seniors, $3 for kids. And the only exemptions to the admission fee policy would be members of the Friends of the Library and Museum and kids under 6. Those would be free. That'll generate an estimated $157,000. Each of the other 5 scenarios generates somewhere between $7,000, this is net income we're talking about, between $7,000 and $38,000. So if the goal indeed is a fairly significant revenue stream to help with the sustainability issues that we looked at in last year's budget, and I think in this instance, vitality is probably not a good synonym for sustainability in this case. You really have to look at scenario 6. So as your museum director, my recommendation would be is if you're going to go down the path of museum admission fees, I would recommend scenario 6. If you feel that is not palatable because of any number of issues that are going to come up with that issue, and I ran this by the city manager this morning, then my recommendation is that you not impose admission fees at all. Because there is, when we looked at this extremely in depth, there is no way to do the admission fees either with residents included or without residents included in any way that limits the expenses you're going to have. You're still going to see a substantial reduction in donations. That's inevitable regardless of the level of admission fee that you impose. And you are still going to have the ongoing and one-time expenses that are going to help us collect those admission fees. So there isn't really any way to limit those. We tried to look at every possible permutation in that area too. And it's going to be a fact of doing business that there are going to be costs associated with that. So with that, I can certainly walk you through the numbers if you like, and if we want to play mix and match with the formula, I've got my calculator, and I can give you at least ballpark numbers. But I think it really does kind of boil down to that either-or recommendation for council.
Questions?
Tim, let me have a copy of that. I can't get into my computer to get that pulled up.
No questions?
Does anybody else need a copy?
No.
Real quick, Tim.
Yes, sir.
At one point in time, there was kind of a rumor that I had heard, unsubstantiated, I guess, that charging a fee would somehow impact our ability to maintain our affiliation with the Smithsonian?
It will not. In fact, I would say that the majority of Smithsonian affiliates do charge a fee. The only requirement with our affiliation status is that you can't charge a special fee for Smithsonian exhibits that you bring in. So if you're a museum that is free of charge, you can't charge a special exhibition fee for visitors who come in to see the Smithsonian exhibit. But there's no restriction whatsoever on charging an admission fee in general.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the average attendance, you have that just over 132,000. How many of those are repeaters? I mean, what would be the actual people, not the attendance?
We don't have any empirical numbers on that, but anecdotally, I would say that it is substantial. If you look at our numbers, approximately 65% of our attendance would be Littleton residents, and I would say that the majority of those are repeat visitors. I mean, we know anecdotally that we see some of the same faces come through 3-4 times a week at the museum, and those are generally young families that come in, particularly either in the morning or in the afternoon to walk through. And
but the 132 is just...
That's a raw attendance number.
That's just somebody coming through.
Correct.
But potentially, theoretically, one person could come through 132,000 times. I'm teasing.
132,000 different
Right.
times, yes.
Yeah.
We do a hard count at the museum, so we are running a counter
Right.
every day that indicates those numbers. But yeah, I mean, theoretically, you could have
So that's what I'm asking.
one
Do you have
family.
any sense of how many people as opposed to repeat people?
No. We've never tried to encapsulate that, so I don't know.
Because, I mean, I know people who go quite often, but I don't know how many. I mean, since I'm not over there that often, I don't know how many of them.
Yeah, as I say, anecdotally, we know a lot of people visit repeatedly, but as far as a hard number, I don't have one. I don't have that. That's not anything that we've ever tried to break out a count on. We could certainly look at it going forward, but we haven't done it. And that would require polling visitors as they come through the door.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got a question. For scenario 5 and scenario 6, give me your formulas how you got to those numbers.
Say that again, Jerry.
Tell me how you got to 24,005 and 157,000.
Well, the projection on scenario 5, excuse me, is $3 for adults, city residents and friends free, kids under 6 free. So we took our percentage of adults as of our total attendance, 35% of, which is approximately 35%, of our average attendance of 132,293. 35% of that is 46,303. If you anticipate a decline in attendance of about 50%, and that includes taking off the top the special events numbers, because one of the recommendations that we have is to continue having some free days, and that would be in keeping with what most museums of our comparable museums are doing. You come up with about 19,250, so you're going to look at about $3 per head out of the adults, and then the balance would be essentially free.
So if I take $3, divide that into the 24.5, and that comes out to about 8,200.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, for the adult component.
Mm-hmm. Well, whatever. Yes, that would be adult.
Well, that's figuring that 65% of our visitation is city residents, so that's going to come off the top of your number. Friends members would be the only exception to that, because we do have some Friends members that are outside
Scenario
the
number 5
city.
mean that only about 8,200.
Well, you would be charging at the adult rate both the adult component and the senior component. You just wouldn't have the seniors broken out as an individual component, because you're essentially charging everyone over the age of 6.
It says city
$3.
residents
And
free.
Friends free, and kids, right.
So that means the $3 are those outside the city.
Mm-hmm.
So if you divide that 3 into the 25,000, that's only about 8,200.
Well, if you take the 19,250, which is your adult component, and then the 13,750, which is your senior component, multiply those by 3, and then you're probably going to also take a component of the children. And then keep in mind you're taking $60,000 off the top for your net, because you're looking at net numbers here, net revenue projections.
I think your formula is flawed, because if you're going to charge anybody who doesn't live in the city of Littleton $3, it doesn't matter if they're a senior or not.
Correct.
So again, with the 24,000, you divide the 3 into it, it only gives you about 8,200. So you can throw that scenario, the senior factors in there and stuff, but it doesn't matter. If they live in Littleton, a senior, they're free. If they don't live in Littleton, they pay $3. And then when you go to scenario number 6, it goes up to almost 40,000.
I don't know if I have the math right with me on scenario 5. I do have the math on scenario 6, though. So if you look at, if you want to switch over to scenario 6, let's see, you're looking for your net of 157,250.
Right.
You're looking at adults, 19,250 at $5. So your breakout there for adults is 96,250. Seniors, 13,250 at $4. Your breakout there is 55,000. Children, 22,000 at $3. Your breakout there is 66,000. So your total gross revenue is 217,250. From that, you're going to take out 10,500, which is approximately a 75% reduction in donations through the city donation box, and 49,500 in your ongoing expenses to, which is primarily the addition of the receptionist position.
But I think even with that 157,000 in scenario 6, with your seniors and adults, it's going to average, somewhere around $4 a little bit more. And I mean, you can do all that math you just said and click your heels all together, but still, it's going to come out to about 39,000 people. And that's why I don't see where the big leap is.
39,000 head count is what you're talking about?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I going through all that formula you just went through doesn't add up for me. Because then when you apply something similar to scenario 5, the numbers they're so far off.
I'll go back and look at scenario 5, but that's that's the math for scenario 6, and you end up with your head count ends up with a total of 54,500 in the 3 classes that you're looking
So
at.
and there's over 100 and how many total adult attendants, seniors included?
For an average for the year?
Yeah.
Total is around 132,000, yeah.
About 132?
And our estimation is you're going to take about 25,000 off the top of that because of the special event numbers, and you'll take about, most museum studies suggest you're going to lose about 50% of your attendance in years 1 through 3, which gets us down to about 55,000 for a
the first
total
few years.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
About 50K.
Tim, I was somewhat trying to follow that math there, but if you just hit on that end, so if you assumed 55,000 following the fee implementation, of that you've got 35,750 being Littleton residents, so going to scenario 5, that leaves at a maximum 20,000 plus whatever percentage are kids. But if you took just the 20,000 times the $3, you get obviously $60,000 minus whatever percentage are friends of residents and kids under 6. So I don't know what those numbers are, but it seems like you could pretty quickly get down to somewhere close to 25. I don't know if that's the exact right number or not.
Pretty close to it. And I didn't bring that math in, because that was an old scenario, but I'll run that again, Jerry, and see if there's
But at
anything that's
maximum,
wrong.
based on your estimates, you're looking at 60,000.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, Jim, sorry.
I'm still having a little difficulty trying to, you say that scenario 6, that net revenue is 157,000?
That's correct.
After you've done all the expenses, the personnel and everything else?
Yeah, we anticipate about $60,000 in total, which would be a reduction in donations plus the ongoing expenses. There'll be some one-time expenses, but I think those will be relatively small, and we can absorb those in the annual budget.
So how many additional personnel would it require to put this into effect?
Well, we think 1 FTE, well, we may do that as we'd probably do it as 2 part-time receptionists so that we'd have some backup. But we think 1 FTE would probably do it. At least that's how we would start out. the primary concern is, and the finance director and I have talked about this probably a year ago, given all the cash handling you would have if we were doing an admission fee, right now our front desk is staffed by volunteers, and trying to do that with volunteers is fairly unrealistic, I think. The concern that finance has, obviously, is the cash handling side. The additional concern would be, particularly if you aren't going to charge residents, you're going to have, I think, an ongoing discussion every day with people who think they live in Littleton. So we'll probably have to look at bringing in a software package, and would be, I think, some concern. Well, we know we've already polled our volunteers, and there would be, I think, a level of discomfort with trying to run that, and also trying to have that daily conversation with a lot of visitors who think they live in Littleton but don't.
South Suburban went through that same process for their inside and outside boundaries.
Yeah, we were aware of that, and we kind of tried to learn from that a little bit too, because I know they had some substantial issues at their
South Suburban charges too, right, Jim?
Yes, for the recreation centers, and that's what it was primarily where the incidence occurs, is that they show up thinking they are a resident within South Suburban to participate in the recreation center whenever they're not.
But you only do that once. You come and find out.
Right.
I mean, if you don't know where you live, well, then you tell them where they live. But when they come back the second time, if they haven't moved and they still think they live in Littleton, you tell them again.
That's a big if they come back.
So Tim, with the Friends, what do people, I mean, like I go to events where we get special admission, so each of us pays for that. But if you're in the Friends, you have a membership, then who does that include? Would that include the whole family?
You can buy family memberships. You can have individual memberships. You can have family memberships. There is a category for business memberships, although we don't have a substantial number of those.
So what's the price?
At this point, it's $15, $20 for a family.
Okay, and individual?
I think it's $15.
So if somebody had 12 kids, they get in for $20.
That's the dues level right now. Yeah.
And I know we raised the issue in part to get money for the general fund, and the Friends can only spend their money on certain things. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, they're specifically precluded by in the early relationship with the city. They're specifically precluded from paying for any staff, any personnel costs, or any capital costs.
So, I think I asked this last summer whenever we first started talking about it. What is the reason perhaps for not charging an admission fee? I'm not saying a number right now. And if you keep that ticket, you can come back as often as you want during the year.
Well, I think the primary reason would be the lack of revenue it would generate. I mean, if the onus was on the visitor to retain their ticket, well,
if you had 32,000 discrete visitors, right? If you did, right now, you generate possibly 150,000 that way.
Yeah, in the ballpark, yeah.
Right, without having to do quite nearly so much taking it of money or whatever if people kept their ticket.
If people kept their ticket and came back, I mean, yeah, I guess you could. If council said that was how they wanted to do it, we could try to do that. I will tell you, I think you would end up with a pretty substantial housekeeping problem, because I suspect that people would lose their tickets and would come in and say, but I had it a week ago and then I lost it and now I don't have it anymore. And there's really no way that we can. I mean, unless we're going to start.
I mean, the onus is on them, right? So if they bought a second,
it would be in that scenario, yeah.
If they bought a second ticket, I bet they wouldn't lose it.
I wish I had your optimism.
Bruce.
Tim, I got just a couple questions. Do we charge out-of-district school kids when they come and visit en masse to the museum?
We do. It's $1 per student, and it's also $1 per adult that comes with those student groups.
So we do have a policy of charging some out-of-school district folks for visiting.
Yeah, we do not charge any students that are in schools within the Littleton city limits. So both private homeschool or public would not be charged. But anyone outside the city limits, it's $1 per person.
So even though it's an LPS school?
Pardon me?
Even though it's an LPS school, if it's outside the city limits?
We actually extend it to include all LPS schools.
Okay, when to qualify.
Any idea how much that would account for annually?
Yeah, it brings in about $16,000 a year.
So you didn't subtract that in this?
We did not. We had looked at the possibility, because we have not raised that price, which is $1 per person. We have not raised that price since its inception in 1994. So, and frankly, it's never been really used as a revenue stream. It's more of a bookkeeping matter, because we found that school groups that have to pay even $1 a head tend to schedule and cancel their reservations, so we don't end up having 15 groups of 75 showing up at the same time, or no one showing up during our slots. It's been more of a scheduling tool than anything else. We did look at the possibility of raising that because it hasn't gone up. We didn't ultimately make that recommendation simply because of a lot of the issues that the school districts are having with transportation, which has gotten so high. Certainly we could look at, you could go to $2 per person. I don't think it would hurt us too much. We've been very fortunate. Many museums in the area that have significantly higher admission charges for their school groups have lost 65% of their school group attendance because the costs are just prohibitive when you combine those with transportation. Our numbers have actually not gone down. We still are at about 100% of capacity. But you certainly could, if you're looking for a way to augment, you certainly could look at that.
And what if we charged for special events, not for the day-to-day access to the museum as many times as somebody would like to go, and none of these other issues that you're discussing, but the special events only?
Well, I think what you'd have, one would be substantially declining attendance, and the special events, since we don't charge them, are events that are put on by our Friends organization, Friends of the Library and Museum, and they're used as a fundraiser for the Friends. So I think ultimately what you're going to end up doing is reducing the revenue that the Friends bring in, which in turn is revenue that they donate to the museum and library for programming. We don't, as you know, we don't have line items in either the library or museum budget for public programming. So any of those programs that we do are provided by the annual grant funding that comes from the Friends. I think ultimately that's what you would do. The difficulty I think that would arise with some of our, particularly with the craft fair, which is the biggest special event that the museum hosts, is it's not on the grounds of the museum. So you'd be trying to charge people going into Kettering Park, and I think you'd probably have to look at some kind of fencing and working through that. It's doable, I think. I've certainly been places where we charge for special events. There'd be some logistical hiccups, I think.
And it's just a gut feeling that I have is, if we were to adopt one of your scenarios, it seems to me we might get a decrease in the number of volunteers, or maybe even a decrease in members of the Friends, just because it's an unanticipated outcome that might happen when suddenly there's a charge for something that everybody volunteered for, felt that motivation, and now that is somehow impacted.
I think you're right on the Friends. We don't have anything that's empirical on that. You are absolutely right on the volunteer side. We already know. We've talked. We have 21 front desk volunteers, and at this point, our estimate is we'd probably lose between 8 and a dozen of those volunteers who would be opposed to an imposition of an admission fee. So yeah, I think you'd see some of that.
But if the museum couldn't sustain it at all, they'd all lose jobs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We have the issue is how do we?
You're exactly
the
right.
city keep the museum, because it's a fantastic place without doubt. We've got to keep it somehow. We just got to find a way to do it. But if right now we the citizens are paying for 35% of the residents, of the attendees, Is that the number you said, I think 35%?
Yeah, that's our.
So, I mean, if the citizens realize that, hey, we're paying for 35% of these folks, and we, the city, are now having some financial issues, because I think you had done a chart, a Gantt chart or something one day, where it shows eventually our expenses, which are continuing, our revenue is not going to continue as fast. There comes a point where we will not have the money for the museum. At some point, we are going to have to charge residents or outsiders or somebody a fee. Now, had we done that when we did the rehab a while back, it would be a no-brainer at this point, everybody would be used to it, we'd be moving on. At some point, it's either going to have to happen or it's going to have to close the doors.
Which my sentiment is that if we get to the point where we can't sustain one of the departments, I would get rid of Charlie's public service, the public works department, before the museum and the library, but the boss.
There goes the roads.
But
the roads
the city
of the
manager
museum.
may not concur with me on that.
Roads or museum, okay.
No, you're exactly
He
right.
just wants the roads that lead to the museum.
Yes, that's right, that's right.
Any other questions?
You've seen through me again, boss.
So, council, do you want to move this to I think we'd end up doing an ordinance with a first and second public hearing, and it would be legislative, so we'd have public hearing for first and second reading. Is this something you want to move to a meeting?
I think it needs more work. I don't know. My opinion is these are good scenarios. I mean, I appreciate the scenarios, that is. I don't know if it's the only scenarios. I don't understand the numbers.
I'll run the numbers on that
So
scenario.
I don't know if I'll suddenly bring an ordinance and say, oh, yeah, let's vote on that. I think it needs more investigation on how we can do this somehow.
You, Jim?
Well, we're not in a crisis, and I think this is going to create a lot more aggravation than it's going to be worth the money that we get in return when you consider the volume of dollars we have in our budget. At $150,000 is not a lot when you're talking about 46 million or more, depending on how you calculate the budget figures. So I'm really not even interested in having it come before us to discuss.
Bruce?
Yeah, I think Tim pretty much said it up front. I mean, you can either impose a large fee relative to historically what's been done, which is not much, or you just pass and it is a free service that the city provides. I guess my view of this thing is, at this juncture, we've spent a lot of time talking about quality of life. I think quality of life for the community is beyond, it's obviously police, fire, roads, public service, sewer, so forth and so on. I mean, I think when people tangibly think about quality of life, they think about the museum and the library and the open space and so forth and so on. To me, under the circumstances, I'm not interested at this juncture in imposing a fee to get in, and I think it's something we do and we provide, and if down the road we have to do something different, we'll consider it. But I'm satisfied with what they've come up with, and I wouldn't go for a fee.
Bruce?
I don't think I'm prepared to request a fee. I think where I am is that, reflecting some of the opinions, we're getting awful close, and we're kind of kicking the can down the road. But I really believe that this is one of those legacies in the city of Littleton that we've created, particularly for our children, and literally generations use that, and that is part of what makes Littleton special. So for $16,000 or whatever the number would be, $24,000, this isn't something we want to give up. But the caution flags, we just have to find a way to make it more of a cost-effective operation, because if we don't take the money from here or get the money from here, it comes from somewhere else, because we're almost to that point. And I know the frustration is, well, we do this every year and we talk about it every year. Yeah, there's a real hesitancy to do it. We don't want to do it, but we're just getting there.
Peggy?
I'd be curious why we're not using our social media to ask citizens to comment on this. we did the Inspire Littleton thing. Why can't we take a few months and get something in the Littleton report and also through eConnect or whatever? Why can't we get some significant input from citizens? Would you be willing to pay $3 or $5, maybe a couple of choices, well, first, do you now use the museum? Do you go? And second, if you do, would you be willing to pay, $3, $5, or $5 for a year, or whatever? I just think, why are we sitting here in a vacuum, assuming how the citizens will respond on this?
We haven't used social media. We have done a visitor study, or a series of visitor surveys, and that's how we came up with the numbers from which we extrapolated the revenue numbers. The proviso I always put on that is that it was done prior to the construction of the new building, and that was one of a series of questions that we asked was about admission fees, or some of the questions were of that series. So it is fairly dated at this point, and we have not.
Well, I mean, because it's dated, I
agree with you.
Skeptical in that. So, but anyway, that's what I'd suggest.
Phil?
I agree we're not quite there yet, but Tim, I'd say, and it's one of those things, I think Hudson Gardens had a fee and they went away from it. But they have other revenue sources, and it's helped them tap into some of the pools that are out there. And I think it's worthy to take a look at, not necessarily a daily item, because, love taking the grandkids to, see the animals and the like that, so they can identify where a hamburger comes from or whatever. But it's horses. There's a
easy.
There's whether it's events, rentals, or some revenue coming through camp, or some of those places where there's an extra value being provided. It's easier to have a revenue stream for something that folks know they're getting a good value. It's a wonderful facility, underutilized when you start to take a look at what might be a productive day for some folks, not the normal work day. And it's just one of those things where I'd say, Tim, we got to keep going at that and saying, okay, how are we going to do this? Not so it's necessarily totally self-supporting, but we have to mitigate some of the cost levels, because kicking the can, you eventually get to the end of that. So, yeah.
Well, I think the general consensus is it's not ready to go into a general meeting, and my suggestion would be that Peggy's indicated she feels some more community outreach might be appropriate. Maybe you come up with some design with that, work with Kelly on the website or something like that. You do Survey Monkey on the website and something.
Yeah, we have a lot more platforms available to us now. So
yeah, exactly. And I think Inspire Littleton's still up. Maybe we run a question on there about it. Jerry's got concerns about the scenarios and stuff, and maybe this would be Michael's directive if we want to look at, as the budget's coming up in September, if you want to look at some way of trying to have something more ready by that point. I'd like to either kill it or do it. We talk about it every single year, and I quite honestly, I agree with Jim. $150,000 is not going to put the city into bankruptcy. We've got, if we're really going to look at cutting stuff, we've got a number of community programs. Unfortunately, they're the low-hanging fruit, they're the non-essentials. And we have looked at them individually. I mean, it may be just one collective thing that we need to look at, because it needs to be a much bigger number than $50,000.
I think that's a really good point, Mayor, and one of the things that Michael and I had talked about was, obviously, if you're looking at $150,000 as your high end on revenue for this, that's not a solution. It can only be a piece of the pie, and you'd have to find 6, 7, 8, 9 things to package with that in order to get to a number that really starts to make a difference. So that really was, given the council's direction, that was really my goal, just to come up with a number that gets closer to that area, but I certainly understand how you guys feel.
Okay.
I think by killing it, that means we don't think about it. I mean, this is something that needs to be continually worked on, because the time is coming. Something has to be done at some point. And as Phil said, and I've alluded to, I think there's other ways. These 6 scenarios are not necessarily the only ways. I know wedding parties, they rent places all the time. You get enough of those things, that will cover those numbers quickly.
You do have substantial expenses that go along with facility rental.
And you charge appropriately, of course. But I'm not saying that's the one to do.
No, but
there are other
you're exactly right.
alternatives that I think just out there. But I think if we just say, oh, let's just have it go away, then we're not going to be thinking about it. I would rather keep it on the table and keep finding a way. It may not be fees.
Okay, good. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Ballot discussion continues. Our next item, it is 10 o'clock. Is this something that we can move, kick down the road?
Let's just say yes, no.
Well, I think we have some
Yes.
discussion that could take a while on these.
I'm done. Just move.
Yeah, I don't know that there's...
Jerry's voted.
I don't, so what I've got on the list is retail marijuana, the direct mayoral election, the charter changes, and then we had the lodging taxes as well. So, yes, we can move it if everyone is done. I don't think any of them are completely time critical. We are prepared to speak on all of them if you would like.
But what's our time frame to have to be having this discussion before we get to the ballot?
Well, it depends upon what, I mean, it's a political question, not, we have plenty of legal time in the sense of the council doing a referendum or putting something on the ballot. It's a question of if you needed to gain support, build momentum, that type of thing. I actually thought it was interesting on the charter that one direction that we could go, and something for you guys to think about, is potentially a charter commission. I'm not sure that we've ever had one, but considering what we were going to bring to you this evening, the charter commission might be a better way to go, and especially since there have been some concerns and issues raised from citizens relative to charter amendments as well, that might be a direction to go, so you might want to think about that. But no, there's no time issue. We can move this 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks.
What's on in 2 weeks?
Another study session.
No, what's on the agenda in 2 weeks?
Oh, I don't. It's 10 o'clock. I was prepared to talk about.
You want to give us? Go ahead.
We would do it June 11th.
Then we've got one on the 28th.
We've got a pretty full agenda on the 28th.
I really think that idea of discussing a charter commission for a real housekeeping look at it has merit. I don't know whether it's what we want to do or not, but we would not have had that discussion tonight, and I think that's where that discussion needs to go.
Yep. So we could certainly put it on for the I'm sorry, what did I just say, June 11th? 11th. Yeah, or we can peel one of them off if you want to go.
You guys want to move it to the 11th, or do you want to start
I'd
chewing
just
through it?
move it, frankly.
Move it? Okay.
I'm easy.
Can we get documents to have for the meeting rather than nothing? Yes, no. Okay.
Yeah, on the charter stuff you have, I mean, the list is yours.
Yeah.
But most of it, I think, is really discussion more than there's no.
Well, I had asked for a little more information on the lodging tax.
Yep, and we have that, and now we just got most of it today, so we can.
No,
there is follow-up. Yep. So we were prepared to discuss it. But we will move it, if that's the consensus of the council, to June 11th.
Okay, man.
Okay.
That is.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Anything else? We do have a breakfast on Thursday with CML. Jeffrey will be here, and Kevin.
7:30.
Yeah, it'll be in this room. And here, this is, you guys can have. This is on the mayor thing. We got that. This would be the document.
Breakfast on the
One for each of you?
So you can,
calendar?
Big piece of paper.
Man, I missed that.
would you hand that to Bruce? Bruce, will you pass this down, please?
Oh, okay,
And here's extra.
Pass one down. What is this?
Sorry, Michael.
What is this?
Sorry.